Chapter 663. Invite what? Invite me to dinner or tea. Hearing his words, Huaisha remained unmoved. Instead, she sat back down on the chair in the room and calmly asked, "Don't tell me that when the time comes, the old man will suddenly throw his cup as a signal, and the Hakihunian warriors of your family will rush out from behind the screen and chop me into pieces? You are Ms. Shin's representative, and also an honored guest of Rikyo House. This kind of humiliation will never happen again in Rikyo House." Kakuyama replied calmly, "We just want to conduct a temporary investigation to clear your suspicion. Ms. Amber has arrived. Please don't worry." "What about Shin?" Huaisha asked. "If I leave, will anyone use her as an excuse? Before you return, this one will not leave this place." Kakuyama replied firmly, "If anything happens to Ms. Shin, you can cut off my head, and I will not have any objections." Just outside the door, a car had quietly stopped. The car door opened, waiting for Ms. Huaisha's arrival. After confirming with Shin that Kakuyama could be trusted, Huaisha handed the Lord of the Flies to her in front of Kakuyama and gave Kakuyama one last look. That kind of look made Kakuyama's back a little cold. He didn't know if it was a threat or a taunt, but when Kakuyama came back to his senses, that graceful figure was already gone. Huaisha sat in the car and finally came back to his senses. Thinking of his swaying steps just now, he couldn't help but sigh. "I'm so flirtatious." Name? Huaisha Suko. Age? 18. Gender? Male. Huaisha rolled her eyes, causing the faces of the old men at the head of the table to darken. "Ms. Huaisha, this was suggested by Inugon family's elder to hold a temporary investigation for you. I hope you can be more serious and not joke around. It's strange. I think you already have the answers to some of the questions, right? Just like my gender, you can't change the answers just because you found a nail in a soft persimmon, right?" Today's Huai poems were still as eccentric as ever, until Hupua, who was watching coldly from the side, was about to poke a few holes in himself with his gaze. All right. If you have any questions, please ask quickly." Huaisha lowered his eyes and glanced at the clock on his phone. "After all, time is precious. Then, let's get straight to the point." In the middle of the seat of honor, the middle-aged man next to Old Hound Jiang said, "Where were you last night?" When he asked the question, his eyes were as sharp as a razor cutting fine cuts on a person's skin. "Sleep," Huaisha replied calmly. "I was drunk last night, and everyone saw it. A bartender did it. And I didn't open my eyes until 10 o'clock this morning." The middle-aged man suddenly asked, "Who can prove that you have been in the room all this time? Who can prove that I wasn't in the room the whole time?" Huaisha sneered. "I thought that you would understand some common sense, but I still say it anyway. This kind of thing is just like on the internet. Whoever has the loudest voice is right. I don't study much, but I remember that all the borders of this country and your country use maritime law, right? However, no matter which law system it is, there is the most basic principle. People can't incriminate themselves. Who makes the claim and who provides evidence is the principle of heaven and earth. Do you want me to teach you this? I used to be a class representative in the Ivory Towers Border Law class." Not only was he a class representative, but with Huaisha's level, the law professor had already begun to occasionally ask Huaisha to teach the class when he wanted to slack off. Occasionally, when Huaisha wanted to slack off, he would also give classical music appreciation to him. Speaking of which, that professor's music appreciation level was really good, and he had a different understanding of classical music, especially Mozart. In fact, everyone in the law class liked Mozart. Maybe everyone felt that when they repeatedly jumped on the edge of the law, listening to Mozart would give them a strange sense of beauty. Now it seemed that the deterrent effect of the border law class was outstanding. Anyway, as soon as Huaisher said that, the middle-aged man's face immediately became ugly. The Ivory Towers border law class was famous for being difficult and troublesome. Every year, there were all kinds of talents who were about to graduate in order to get higher evaluation points from the teacher. They tirelessly wandered between the borders and did something that was not allowed in the law. This was a warning. If Lamia Hall tried to use this aggressive method again, Huaisher had the right to hire a graduate as a lawyer to defend the poor and helpless Miss Motoko. When the atmosphere gradually fell into a stalemate, the silent Inu Jiang suddenly coughed twice. As the one who played the role of a good policeman, he finally said, "Mr. Yamanaka lost his words for a moment. Please don't be offended. He was just too anxious, because Miss Motoko's habit is too similar to that of a murderer. Therefore, no, this is not the same, right?" Miss Motoko suddenly made a sound and interrupted him. She spread her hands and told him seriously, "This is obviously not the same thing." Inu Jiang was stunned for a moment and immediately nodded, "I'd like to hear the details." Cough. A friend once told me that beheading is different from correcting a mistake. Huaisher raised a finger and said seriously, "It's not just whether there is a complete cut or not, whether there is a connection left. Even the method and thinking are completely different. In your eyes, is there only one way to chop off the neck in the world?" Even if you say so, Yamanaka was about to speak, but he was interrupted again. "Listen, what I want to tell you is that there is a decisive difference between beheading and correcting a mistake," Huaisher said coldly. "The so-called beheading is a very straightforward and very comfortable method. It won't be sticky and confusing. Do you understand that when it's time to make a decision, it's time to make a decision? This is the simplest and most straightforward way to end it. Its purpose is to kill something, to make something disappear, to let something leave the world, to avoid endless poison. You just need to find the right place, then cut, and everything will be over. Other than that, anything else is superfluous. So you need to be more cautious, examine your own purpose, examine your own deviation and thoughts. If there is a second solution, you should not use it, because a person only has one life, and there is no possibility of redeeming it. What the F***ck are you talking about?" Yamanaka wanted to refute her like this, but when she said these words, her expression became solemn and serious, as if she was narrating some irrefutable truth. She did not allow others to interrupt her. But the guy who corrects a mistake is different. Huaisher squinted and suddenly said, "If I didn't see wrongly at the scene, some people had been tortured before they died, right?" Once again, he recalled the corpse he saw in the alley, the tragic ravages that happened before the beheading. That guy's focus was not on the beheading, but what happened before the beheading. The deceased experienced pain, and the final mistake was just a pity for you. From the beginning, it was contrary to the basic idea of beheading. Yamanaka was furious and stared at him. "Do you think this kind of sophistry will work?" "I'm just saying some of my own thoughts. Isn't this what you asked me?" Huaisher shrugged and helplessly spread his hands. But when he looked at the faces of those people, he couldn't help but smile. To be honest, I don't know why he specifically used this way of killing, but I think he wants you to pay the price. Could it be that, among you guys, have you done something that you feel guilty about? In the silence, no one spoke. Only Yamanaka's face became more and more ugly. Inu Jiang was still silent, as if he didn't hear. "Bingo!" Huaisher seemed to hear hallucinatory prompt. It didn't take long for the short interrogation meeting to finally end. It didn't succeed in clearing the suspicion. Anyway, Even if Looming Hall said that they believed that Huaisher wouldn't be the wrong murderer, Huaisher probably wouldn't believe them. The final decision was that although there was suspicion, it wasn't big. During the investigation, they couldn't leave the range of Regi's house. And they couldn't go out, which was equivalent to a different kind of grounding. Maybe it was because he went out occasionally to kill before, and it left some shadow in the hearts of the old men of Looming Hall. Huaisher didn't care about personal freedom. Anyway, he was hired to cook. After the trial of the culinary demon was over and Maki's matter was settled, he would leave. Would Looming Hall dare to stop him? After sending him out, Hoopa felt that he was about to be mentally and physically exhausted. It's just a formality. Why do you keep looking for trouble? If I can handle it, I'll directly take her away. If I can't, then I'll just go through the motions. Why do all the good and bad things have been said by Looming Hall? Huaisher sneered, not buying the pretense of those old men at all. It's best to be careful. Those old men might be planning how to deal with you after the competition. Hoopa shook his head. What level do you think those ascenders of Looming Hall are at? They're average. They can barely maintain law and order. But when it comes to using them for something, they're so stingy that they can't do anything. Huaisher evaluated. If you really want to rely on those people to catch the wrong murderer, then it's better to hope that they can die in a place where they won't cause trouble for others. That's normal. The left, right, and center offices are just organizations that Looming Hall uses to cooperate with the MPD to maintain social order. The truly capable people have long been chosen to enter the departments of fire control and thief control, not to mention the throne that belongs to the emperor in name. After Hoopa casually warned him, he asked, "It sounds like you have some sort of idea just now." "Maybe I'm just gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. I'm just using my shallow criminal experience to do some reverse analysis." Huaisher thought for a long time and said seriously, "I think there's a problem with your family." Chapter 664. I think there's something wrong with your family. After hearing this, Ricky Amber felt that the world had become even more fantastical. She looked at Huaisher strangely. "How can you think that there's nothing wrong with our family? Anyone with eyes should know that there's something wrong, right?" Huaisher was a little stunned and immediately embarrassed. "My family used to be like this. I thought it was quite normal." Amber rolled his eyes when he saw this. "As long as there are too many people, there will be problems everywhere. Once there's too much money, there will be problems even if there's nothing wrong. It's not strange that there's something wrong with the Ricky family, but it's strange that there's nothing wrong with them. No, I'm just sure of one thing." Huaisher sighed softly. "These days, I've been thinking about why Sasaki didn't want to show up, but insisted on secretly tracking the clues of the murderer. Is there a possibility that he realized that the Ricky family can't be trusted anymore?" After a pause, his expression became gloomy. "That is to say, if the situation is worse, the murderer may be hiding in the Ricky family now, right?" Amber didn't say anything, so she just shrugged. "Who do you think it could be?" Huaisher stared at her, and she also looked at Huaisher without saying anything. Huaisher also didn't say anything, but looked straight at her, as if he was going to force her to say something with his telekinesis. "Huaisher, I didn't invite you to be a detective. Isn't it normal for a tool to have multiple jobs?" Huaisher smoked and squinted at her. "Besides, didn't you tell me about this in the first place? Why are all of you Ricky family members the same, saying one thing after another, one thing after the other? No matter what you say, you're always right, huh?" "It's different now," Amber answered expressionlessly. "If you were just a tool, I would have pushed you into the mud pit and used you until you got back 70 million yuan. But Zhen, she is different. She has nothing to do with these scandals." Huaisher was speechless. "You're really planning for Zhen Shi?" What else? If given the chance, who wouldn't want to be a good person? Hoopa shook his head. The only difference is who can be the bad guy when something happens. Huaisher sighed. To be honest, everyone looks like a murderer to me now, including you. What about Maki? Amber asked. Forget it. Huaisher shook his head. She was the first person I checked, but she couldn't even hold a kitchen knife. With her weight and strength, she couldn't even cut a chicken's neck, let alone a human neck. Don't make things difficult for her. It might not be impossible, right? Hoopa asked. It's not that it's not certain. It's absolutely impossible. Huaisher answered her flatly. With her physical strength and condition, there is only one person in the world who can do such a thing. We all know that person, don't we? The corners of Hoopo's eyes twitched violently. He didn't say anything. Who else could it be? Luo Xian. If it was Sister Xian, she might be able to kill her way from Nara to Kyoto with a small piece of paper in her hand. But if it was really her, she didn't need to hide at all. She could kill everyone in the Riken family with a kitchen knife. Maybe there was a second person in the world who had such a talent, but it definitely couldn't be Maki. The probability of this was even more exaggerated than Huaisher going out to buy a pack of cigarettes and running into 8 destructive elements. You really trust her. Trust is mutual. Hoopa. Huaisher looked over and stared into Hoopo's eyes. So, answer me, are you a murderer? Hoopa was amused and suddenly asked, Huaisher, do you hate your family? It depends, Huaisher said, although I want to beat them up sometimes. It's not like I hate them to the point of being irreconcilable. If we can't live together, we can live separately. Isn't it the same? That's great. Huaisher, I want to be like you, but unfortunately, I can't be so forgiving. Amber pinched out his cigarette and stamped it out. He looked around calmly. There were many times when I really wanted to kill those idiots who made a fool of themselves, but unfortunately, in this world, there's no end to those stupid teammates who drag others down. What's even more regrettable is that I can't do that. The murderer can be anyone here, but it can't be me. His expression was full of regret, as well as envy that could not be faked. Huaisher sighed. If you have any deep hatred for this place, you can just say it. Take out some evidence of those guys doing shameful things, pull in the Dongxiao family, and we'll team up to do a dungeon. I'll kill them from the front door to the back door with you. Isn't that easier than competing with others in cooking? In that case, the Riken family won't exist at all, right? Hoopa shook his head. It takes many years to build a family and many people's efforts, but it only takes an instant to destroy a family. I didn't come back to destroy all of this, and I didn't hire you because you're good at chopping off people's heads. Don't be mistaken. It sounds like you have great expectations for me. That's right, Your Highness. Hoopa looked at him one last time and said seriously, just focus on being a chef. This is a very promising job. You don't have to worry about anything else. Hoopa waved his hand and turned to leave. In the end, she didn't tell Huaisher about her suspicions. She was fooled. However, Huaisher's impression of Zhenshi had changed quite a bit after seeing her care and concern. Even if to her, it was just a little bit of extra space that slipped through her fingers, he casually put the lighter in his hand into his pocket. He turned around and walked out of the door. He saw the girl who had been waiting for a long time under the sun. She was happily waving at Miss Huaisher. Zhenshi, Miss Huaisher, you've worked hard. They didn't make things difficult for you, right? With the excuse of caring, Zhenshi grabbed Miss Huaisher's little hand and carefully rubbed it. I was so worried about you. It's good that you're fine. No matter how you look at it, it's more like you're lusting after my body. Huaisher began to have a headache. He secretly and forcefully pulled his hand out of her grasp. Then he raised his hand and pressed it against her forehead, blocking Jin, she who was about to pounce on him. He kept a safe distance. He didn't have such a thing as a chest. What if he touched something indescribable and terrifying? It's just a little while. You don't have to be so anxious, right? Because I'm worried. Jin, she tried to move forward while resisting her hand. She accidentally said what she was thinking. Uncle Jiaoshan said that those old men aren't good people. I think they're just lusting after Miss Huaisher's beauty. Wasn't that the plot in the little booklet in the convenience store? Once their weakness was caught, they would be forced to do this, and that by those perverted old men. Thinking of this, Jin, she wanted to bite her handkerchief. Her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. She didn't know if she was envious or angry. Can you be serious for a moment? Huaisher curled her fingers and mercilessly knocked her on the head. She curled her lips and said, everyone had a friendly discussion, cleared up the rumors, cleared up the misunderstanding, and reserved their opinions. The meeting ended in a harmonious atmosphere. Ah, such a bureaucratic tone. Anyway, it's just some meaningless pretense. Don't worry about it. Huaisher said, instead of worrying about this, you should worry about where to sleep at night. The house has been destroyed. What should we do? Don't worry about that. Jin, she became excited again. Uncle Jiaoshan gave us a big house. Even the kitchen is much more spacious than before. There's even a private hot spring in the back. It's said that it's good for the skin. Let's go to the hot spring together after we go back. Hot spring? Forget it. I'm not interested in hot water. Hey, let's go together. Let's go together. Jin, she wagged her little invisible tail and ran back and forth around Miss Huaisher. Her eyes were full of hope. Miss Huaisher's skin is so good. Let me soak in it and let me bask in it. Huaisher could only look up at the sky and sigh. It's not a matter of basking in the light or not. It's a matter of whether some of your thoughts can be seen in the light or not. No, he refused decisively. I'm tired. Let's go home and sleep. Okay, Jin, she followed beside him dejectedly. Her dejected look made Huaisher feel like she had done something unforgivable. He sighed and couldn't help but shake his head. Anyway, you're going to run for the head of the family. She shook her head. Don't always act like a child. Being the head of the family is something that cousin Hupur and cousin Jiu Jing should worry about. Just the thought of having to deal with those old fogies every day makes me feel terrible. It's too scary. When you first decided to run for the head of the family, you still acted like you were very powerful. Huaisher sighed. I think that if you're serious, you'll be able to get the hang of it very quickly. This is different. Although I've had that kind of dream before, it feels completely different from what I imagined. Jin, she looked away and muttered in a low voice. Anyway, if I had to stay in a place like this for the rest of my life, I definitely wouldn't be able to bear it. Even if I had a very comfortable bed and could earn a lot of money, it would still be very sad. Anyway, I'm very old-fashioned. The life in the television doesn't suit me. When she said this, it made people feel like she was a country bumpkin who had nothing to lose. Huaisher didn't know whether to sympathize or be surprised. He was just a little worried. Zhanshi, are you okay? I'm sorry. It's just that when I think about Miss Huaiji leaving after the competition, I feel a little sad. Zhan, she lowered her head and pulled Huaisher's sleeve, looking pitiful. No matter how powerful I looked before, I was just a fox pretending to be a tiger. Once Miss Huaiji is gone, I'll definitely be beaten back to square one. Can I stay for a while longer? Sorry. I'm afraid that's very difficult. After all, there's still a lot of work to do. Huaisher replied, helplessly, don't be sad. Even if I'm not here, Hupa will definitely take care of you. But that's different from Miss Huaiji. Zhan, she shook her head. I know that my cousin, Hupa, definitely won't care. but I don't want to live under someone else's roof. Since I was young, my mother has always said that if you don't work, you won't eat. If I want to truly live a peaceful life, I really have to find a stable job, right? You've already thought about it. Yes, she thought for a moment and said firmly, although it's not a dream or anything, I already have something I want to do in the future. The girl's expression was rarely serious. She was so serious and solemn, as if she was afraid that Miss Huaiji wouldn't agree. She was waiting for his approval. Huaisher was stunned for a long time. He couldn't help but reach out and ruffle her hair. It's a good thing to have a goal, but can you tell me the specifics? This is a secret. I feel like it'll be funny if I tell you. Jeanne, she avoided his gaze and said embarrassedly, when the day comes that I can do it, I'll tell Miss Huaiji. Huaisher laughed. Then you'll have to do your best. Yes. Jeanne, she nodded vigorously and also laughed, suggesting, Miss Huaiji, I'll cook porridge tonight. We can also fry some spring fish. Okay. After eating, let's go to the hot spring together. No. Let's go. No, I have rabies. I'm afraid of water. Sound is fine too. I'm afraid of heat. No. As they chatted, they slowly made their way back to where they were supposed to go. When Junshi raised her head, she could see Miss Huaiji's back in front of her. Her slender figure was bathed in the afternoon sun, as if the sun was gradually overlapping. It was sparkling. Just looking at it was enough to make people feel at ease. Even if they walked into the darkness, they could feel the warmth that made people yearn for moving on the earth. As long as they saw it once, they wouldn't despair in anxiety and hesitation. No matter how long the dark valley was, that was the most precious thing in the world. Compared to it, the position of the head of the family and the beautiful life on TV were not even worth mentioning. I want to be like Miss Jeanne, she whispered softly. She'd buried this wish deep in her heart, which she would never tell her, and stepped forward to catch up. Chapter 665. In another quiet room, the young warrior respectfully took 3 steps back on his knees, bowed his head again, and said goodbye to the old man of the looming hall. Then I'll have to trouble you to take care of me. You're welcome. We're all part of the government. It's only right to take care of each other. Mr. Jiujing is so young, the future matters will depend on you. The old minister also responded with a smile on his face, without any mistakes or omissions, and the arrogance of the people of the capital could not be seen. Only after he saw Jiujing leave did the smile on his face gradually fade. He's a good young man, isn't he? He said to himself. In the shadow behind him, a blurry outline appeared, responding to the Lord's words. In my opinion, he is indeed dignified, but his eyes are like a fox's. Recalling that pair of slender eyes, the old minister lowered his eyes and frowned. This did not mean that he was as cunning as a fox or so charming. It was just that he had an uneasy prejudice. No matter how upright and solemn he looked, he always felt that pair of eyes always had an indescribable evil aura, like a crack that led to the darkness. But in the end, the saying that you can judge people by their eyes and faces is unreliable. This is nothing more than my own conjecture. It would be a joke to reject such a talent because of this. He paused for a moment, then suddenly said in a loud voice, "Watch him." The servant in the shadow nodded in response. Warriors were lackeys. Just like what Jiaoshan once said, no matter how dignified it was, the mission of a warrior was to walk for the Lord. Whether it was fighting on the battlefield or cutting off future troubles, it was their duty. This was the essence that could not be covered up by the Yi Yin's tale and the Book of 5 Wheels. After the layers of halo and the so-called morality were stripped away, only the part that belonged to the heartstick could represent itself. Thugs, bodyguards, soldiers, to the government, they were just dogs. However, there were many types of dogs. Loyal dogs, fierce dogs, crazy dogs, useless dogs, dogs that betrayed their owners. There were also dogs like Quan Jiang, who was a loathsome guard dog. While pondering, her husband suddenly raised his head and ordered the servant outside the house, "Later, take my nameplate and go to see Inu Jiang Zhongzhuan. Tell him that I have long admired the Rigian clan. I have heard that the Rigian clan has hidden a secret treasure of the Yatsufusa. I want to see it." Yes. The servant outside the room turned around and ran away. In the silence, no one spoke. The car door opened, and Hoopa saw Guashuk's old face with a strange smile. Holding his little teapot, he clicked his tongue and sighed, "It's good to be young. It reminds me of when I was young. Sure enough, you should find a partner when you're young. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, as long as you're happy." Hoopa felt helpless once again. He had no choice. He really couldn't deal with this old bastard. So, just like how the Egyptian genealogy produced orthopedics, the Roman genealogy produced perverts, and the Russian Federation genealogy loved little boys. Could it be that the Dongxia genealogy produced this kind of headache-inducing old monster? She thought about Lu Wu, Mystic Bird, Judas, and Emperor Qing. Hoopa's head began to hurt. "Whatever you say." She leaned against the car seat and sighed heavily. "Don't be so lethargic. When you're young, you should go out more often and get some sun. Once you're old, you won't want to move anymore. You'll just sit in your little room day after day. The only thing you can talk about is cooking." Guashuk sipped the tea from the teapot that seemed to never be finished. He looked at her disheveled appearance and gloated, "You seem to be very annoyed by your work." Hoopa shrugged. "Who says I'm not? There are so many things to do, and I'm afraid of breaking the vases. In the end, it's a mess." Guashuk shook his head. "I'm talking about Hoopa." "It's Hoopa." The girl raised her voice. "I'm Erjuzi, Little Flower. Can you please respect the traditions of Ingzhou and not call me like a northeastern child?" The old man curled his lips. "It's just a title. With your age. Even my granddaughter looks old. Isn't it the same if you call me Hoopa or Nanan?" He paused for a moment and asked, "You're talking about that Jia Chui murderous demon. Is he strong?" Hoopa wanted to say something, but hesitated. She sighed helplessly. "It's not a matter of whether he's strong or not. He's very troublesome." "How troublesome?" "No matter who the other party is, right now, this is clearly a method used to stir up trouble and interrupt the Rigian family's master selection. Before the culinary demon trial is over, who knows what kind of trouble will be caused? What's more, that idiot Rigian Bujing died in that kind of place, giving the looming hall the best excuse. They can't wait for the Rigian family to admit that the situation is out of control and then fully take over. That old man Inu Jiang brought out the old rules and held some culinary demon trial. It's a hindrance to them." Hoopa rubbed her brows and sighed regretfully. "I'm afraid this is just a prelude. Soon, the current Rigian family will gradually become a battlefield between the Gong family and the Wu family." She could foresee that that day was very close. At that time, Nara would definitely become a huge whirlpool. "That's why I envy you young people." Guashuk laughed ambiguously and asked again, "Under such circumstances, how long do you think the Imperial Culinary Demon trial will last?" Hoopa thought for a moment and replied, "It's half over now, but they should be more cautious later. If they want to really get to the bottom of it, it'll take at least a month, right?" "A month? Then wouldn't the kimchi I pickled before I left be spoiled?" Guashuk frowned in shock. "That's why you should stop thinking about your kimchi at a time like this, okay? Besides, it's only a month. It's fine to just leave the kimchi there. Other kimchi are fine, but mine isn't. The culinary demon's blood also has a shelf life. If I wait until next month, Where am I going to find so much culinary demon's blood to exchange for water? Hoopa rolled her eyes and was speechless. That's why I say it's good to be young. Everything can be done slowly. Gwashuk sighed and said sincerely, when people get old, they will know that time is precious. They won't be willing to waste too much time on meaningless things. What's precious is not patience, but decisiveness. Only people who don't have much time left will understand how precious time and efficiency are. He put down the teapot and suddenly said, Little Who, about that naming duel, help me arrange it. Hoopa sighed helplessly. She didn't have the energy to fix it anymore. She only asked, Do you want a name? Do you have a list? Hoopa took out a few books from the bag behind the car seat. He looked through them casually and handed over a document. Gwashuk took it and flipped it open. Including the introduction, it was only 2 simple pages. The old man took out a page and pointed at the name at the very front. This, Hoopa glanced at it. The general of the Undermountain cuisine. This guy is very weak. Are you planning to bully him? No, I mean other than this. Gwashuk picked up the list seriously and pointed it at Hoopa's face. He said seriously, Other than this guy, who can't even be brought to the table, name everyone else. 7, all of them? All of them. Gwashuk said calmly, They're all just a bunch of people who want to fish in troubled waters. Instead of letting them waste this old man's time, why don't I just get rid of them? Hoopa was stunned. But this is too what? Exaggerated? I don't think so. The corners of Gwashuk's mouth slowly curled up. His wrinkled face revealed a smile unique to a predator. There are only 7 dishes of this level. Do you think this old man can't finish them all? In the silence, a malevolent malice that came from the abyss appeared in those pitch-black eyes. There's a method called cutting the Gordian knot. No matter what they do, as long as the competition is over, the result will be unshakable. Since you know it's going to rain soon, shouldn't the most important thing be to put away the clothes first? He was smiling, full of anticipation. After he shed his usual disguise of being old and kind, what was revealed was the madness and malevolence that was brewed from countless demonic culinary skills. He had once gone deep into paradise and didn't become a dish on a plate. Instead, he was a terrifying existence that escaped unscathed from the rancher. There's no need to be so serious, right? Hoopa was stunned. This is professionalism. Little Who, he said matter-of-factly, aren't I here to cook? Before they mess up my competition, why don't you let me have some fun first? When this abnormal sense of hunger could no longer be concealed, the biggest monster in this trial of the imperial culinary demon issued a challenge to all the opponents. 1 against 7? In the evening, Huaisher, who received the news, didn't feel good. Is it that exaggerated? Yes, it's that exaggerated. Hoopa said tiredly on the phone. The old man was impatient. He wanted to have some fun before someone decided to flip the table. In the end, he moved his mouth, and I ran my legs. Isn't the position of the agent and the employer reversed? Do you need to change the agent? I want to recommend a famous idol culinary demon, Mr. Huaisher. He's good, doesn't stick to people, does things for money, and absolutely won't cause any trouble. Okay, you go and fight with him. Whoever wins gets the job. Forget it. The corner of Huaisher's eyes twitched. Even if he had seen an overly powerful opponent like Eliza, Huaisher still couldn't see through Old Gwa's depth. That old guy hadn't used his real strength since the beginning of the competition. He could be said to be unfathomable. At this time, he was still glad that he hadn't been selected. How could he be so reckless as to deliver food to the door? Miss Huaisher was very gentlemanly. Jumping into a frying pan or something, forget it. So, 1 against 7, things like taking turns to fight. You really settled it. After all, the employers are some small characters who can only muddy the water if they stay. It's not difficult to get something on them or give them a reward that they can't refuse. It's just that my legs hurt from running. Huaisha thought for a long time and said seriously, Hupa, I sell my body, not my skills. Forget about massaging my legs. Bang. The sound of the phone being squeezed came from the other end. Do I care? I'm afraid you'll think too much. Misunderstandings have to be explained clearly, right? Huaisha casually said. Then, what's the specific time? What time? Tonight. Before Hupa hung up the phone, he told him in an hour. Chapter 666. Although it was said to be an hour, they had actually waited for 2 to 3 hours. It was obvious that some people were not happy to see the chef's demon trial speeding up, and were secretly trying to stop them. However, in the end, no one was able to openly violate the rules of the chef's demon trial. After Tsang Jiang nodded his head, the challenge was quickly approved. In order to protect the Rigian family's property and reputation, this samurai, who had been mocked as an old dog, had put in a lot of effort these days. When he met Guashuk's arrogant challenge, it was like meeting a pillow. When he was sleepy, among everyone, he was probably the one who wanted the chef's demon trial to end as soon as possible. Even if the Gong clan and Wu clan wouldn't give him a good ending after this matter was over, it wouldn't be long before they would casually find a reason to send him a piece of paper, a piece of white cloth, and a rib. They would urge him to be on his way as soon as possible. Tsang Jiang did not care about this at all. Whether it was blind loyalty or stubbornness, that old man had already bet his life on the responsibility that the Rigian family had entrusted to him. The cruelest thing in the world was death. If a person was not afraid of death, then what difference did it make to him, no matter how strong the opponent was? 2 hours later, the 8 enforcers of the Rigian family finally gave their permission. Huaisha had seen enough of the commotion and finally brought Zhen Shi to watch. As soon as they entered, they saw the tattooed Russian Federation's fur bear, Vladimir, waving at them enthusiastically. Over here, over here. Heh, bootlicker. Huaisha glanced at him and pretended not to see him. He continued to maintain the image of Miss Huaiji as a noble and cold goddess. Vladimir still looked like a wild punk. After grinning at Zhen Shi, he withdrew his gaze. After Huaisha sat down, he realized there were indeed a lot of people here today. Not only were the representatives of the candidates present, even the chef's demon chefs who had already been eliminated were here. For example, the head chef of the Three Roads, Shun Jinji, industrial chef Shijian, and so on. Even the eliminated candidates were not willing to miss this feast. After all, it was Guashuk, an undying old monster. However, he hadn't appeared in a public competition for more than 20 years. Only the cooking demons who had heard about him from their teachers, and rumors couldn't come to a conclusion. 1 against 7, could such an exaggerated thing really be done? No matter how watery a cooking demon was, he was still a cooking demon. They were elites and experts that were 1 in a million. If the one-on-one duels were divided into 7 days, perhaps the old man would be able to defeat all of his opponents easily. However, fighting against 7 genuine cooking demons in a row, this kind of ridiculous matter was simply unimaginable. Even if he was known as the Tao Tai, his appetite shouldn't be so exaggerated, right? Oh ho, everyone is here? Sorry to keep you waiting. Just as everyone was waiting, the kind and warm voice that sounded like an old man walking his bird in the park sounded from the entrance. He was carrying a bamboo basket in one hand and a heavy cloth package in the other. No one knew what was inside. Casually strolling past, he greeted each of his peers in a friendly manner, and the bloody package in his hand looked like a pig head. Huaisha raised his brows. For some reason, he felt very familiar with the shape of the heads of various creatures. Could it be that he had gained a passive ability after chopping off too many heads? Oh my, did she see through it? Guashuk chuckled. Miss Huaisha has great taste. It's the only one with 7 tastes. He casually walked to the side of his counter, put down his things, and opened the package. Inside the package was a pig head that had just been bled out. It had yet to be singed or treated. It wasn't easy to find this thing. I've traveled all over Nara, and it took me 2 hours to find a pig farm. You people from Ingzhou are so troublesome, you can't even raise your pigs properly. He casually pulled the pig head's ears and mouth. He then placed his elbow on the pig's head and looked up at the 7 enemies with gloomy expressions. Everyone, are you ready? Thank you for your kindness, Senior. How can we not come? A cooking demon from Ingzhou said sinisterly, although we're being underestimated, I'm not so desperate that I'll give up on myself. Even if I have to use any despicable means, I'll try my best to let you taste the essence of my cooking. Good, good. Guashuk was relieved. So, you're the first one? Shall we start? The other 7 cooking demons looked at each other and nodded slowly. Since the opponent dared to fight 1 against 7, they wouldn't be so arrogant as to think that they could win just because they outnumbered them. The opponent was indeed unfathomable, but if they fought as a group, they might be able to win. The first one to be sent out was undoubtedly the strongest among them, but the other 6 weren't just there to make up the numbers. The cooking demon, who was the strongest and most confident, was the last one to be sent out. The rest of them would do whatever they could to exhaust his endurance. A war of attrition, 7 against 1. If they won, they might not be able to do anything, but if they lost, they would become a laughingstock. If things went wrong, their restaurants might be downgraded. What they wanted was absolute stability. Let me say this first. I'm an expert in stone cooking. Although the snow moon flour I prepared today has 10 dishes, there's no possibility of separating them. They'll only be served together. This is the so-called fixed meal. Head Chef Gua, you don't have any objections, right? Standing in front of the counter was Chai Chuan Chuang, the veteran cooking demon of the famous stone restaurant Dayan. Set meal? I know. It's like the feeling of falling in love with a mouthful of beer and a mouthful of fried chicken. It's understandable. Guashuk laughed as he talked about old jokes that young people didn't know. He patted the pig's head next to him. But this old man is getting old, and his stamina is a little weak. Shameless. Everyone's expression became very complicated. Why was this old bastard talking nonsense with such a serious face? Compared to his prime, Guashuk's stamina was indeed weaker. However, the strength of a sublimator couldn't be compared with common sense. Moreover, even if Guashuk hadn't used any power other than that of a cooking demon, he could still walk in and out of paradise alone. Could he be a weakling? If he was a weakling, what about the others here? Cell-level noobs. Once he said that the 7 cooking demons' expressions became unsightly. After pondering for a long time, Chai Chuan Chuang said, "Are you talking about rest time? We can discuss it, but it can't be too excessive." No, you misunderstood. Guashuk opened his mouth and laughed. He waved his hand. Rest time? There's no need. Please don't worry. After a short silence, Chai Chuan Chuang looked puzzled. What do you mean? Don't you think it's not good to bully young people too much? I'll take a step back. Guashuk smiled and patted the pig's head under his elbow. He said warmly, what I mean is no matter what you make, I can accept it and eat it. However, I'm old and I don't want to waste my energy. So, I'll just cook this dish today. He spread out his hands and said with a calm face, as long as one of you can eat this dish of mine, it'll be my loss. Bang! The sound of something breaking broke the silence. Under Chai Chuan Chuang's hand, a crack appeared on the chopping board. This middle-aged man, who had kept a calm face, widened his eyes. His eyes were bloodshot, and his expression was indescribably ferocious. He was furious. Not only him, but also the other 6 cooking demons behind him. At this moment, under such a disdainful and contemptuous condition, they fell into an unstoppable rage. If this wasn't a duel between cooking demons, even if Chai Chuan Chuang knew that there was a big gap between their strength, he would still raise his fist and punch this old smiling face. What do you think? The condition is fair, right? Guashuk still didn't think it was enough. He smiled proudly. I like a fair duel the most. Both sides have to stand on the same starting line. In this way, no matter how weak you are, as long as you eat this dish, you can win, right? What do you think? What do you think? Ha ha ha. Don't joke around. Chai Chuan Chuang roared and slammed his hands on the table. I will never accept such a humiliating condition. Guashuk, you bastard. How much are you going to humiliate us before you stop? Are you angry? Guashuk looked at him in shock, as if he couldn't understand. Is this considered humiliating? It's too strange. I'm just giving you a chance. Besides, do you have a choice not to accept it? He grinned, and his old face slowly twisted. He didn't hide the malice and ferocity in his heart anymore. Even if you want a bargain, you should at least have enough, right? I won't give you a little face and start a dye factory, okay? The old man was laughing. He pressed the pig heads of his subordinates and told them, listen, I will do this, whether you accept it or not. If you can't stand such a humiliation, please turn around and leave. Even if you admit defeat by leaving, it's okay. That way, you can flatter yourselves, right? It's not like I can't even defeat a 170-year-old old man in a group fight. I just can't stand being humiliated. Ha 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 ha. In the dead silence, only the old cooking demon's laughter could be heard. Everyone's faces turned darker and darker. That old man is too despicable. Huaisha murmured. Isn't this as cool as a battle between powerful warriors? Shinichi looked at him in surprise. The halberd film gives off the vibe of an old swordsman, with his eyes covered. It's so cool, no matter how I look at it. She still didn't understand what was going on. Chapter 667. It's a psychological attack. Huaisha explained, once on the field, both sides should be equal. They should go all out and let the opponent lose without any regrets. That guy looked down on the opponent by going 1 against 7 at the beginning, And now he proposed such humiliating conditions. In addition to saving energy to digest, more importantly, it's to stimulate the opponent's mentality. Oh, it's like scolding people when they're playing basketball on TV. Shinichi clapped his hands and suddenly realized, so despicable. Tricks are also a kind of trick, Shinichi. That old guy doesn't care about what others say. At his age, he's fought all kinds of bad battles and has a lot of experience. If he can break the opponent's mentality with just a few words, he doesn't mind spending a bit of saliva. If someone leaves the field in anger, he'll make a lot of money. Huaishur didn't hide his voice when he spoke. With the hearing of an ascender, it was like a classmate talking behind his back during self-study. It was impossible not to hear. He did it on purpose. He wanted to make the old man feel uncomfortable. The stronger the opponent, the more skills he would have to show. No matter what, he had to see the depth of the opponent. The old man didn't seem to care at all. He glanced at Huaishur and nodded approvingly. His expression was that of a child who could be taught. Even using such a despicable trick, it seems that Senior Gu doesn't have any confidence in his skills. Chai Chuan, who finally calmed down, said the other cooking demons also felt that something was wrong. I won't let you get what you want. Makoto, even if it's a losing battle, I'll do my best, but immediately notice the change to a kid like me. She asked curiously. He closed his eyes and calmed down. I really hope that you Ingzhou people don't usually eat for the match to begin. So, as usual, you don't know, after a bunch of nonsense that no one listened to, Huaishur voiced the bronze bell finally rang. In fact, he did not have much experience, nor did he study the unorthodox were like moving clouds and flowing water. However, making his dishes had helped Feng as if they were an art. The stone feast itself originated from the Zen sex banquet. And his the most important thing was to be calm. Huaishur had seen the specific as the head process. He naturally couldn't fall behind. It had to be taken apart. Then the lymph nodes, once the corners of the eyes, and other inedible things automatically taken out. All irrelevant things. They had to be and began to make his own dishes with all his strength. Even if it was for roasting or other things, finally moved. It still required he took out a shaver process and started to shave looking at the pig's head. It was probably still fresh, like a hairdresser. It had just been cut off from the neck. Removed. The breed was not special either. The hot water it was just an ordinary pig. Already boiling. Washuk handled it. He casually pulled off the pig's ears that the blood could not be the pig's head into the boiling water. It would only be disgusting. Ignoring the boiling water that reached up to his elbows, old man intended to make it so disgusting and casually tossed his opponent's head on the chopping board. That would be too finally ridiculous. He rolled up the other sleeve of his seven cooking demons. Huaishur could not help but their eyes were burning red like zombies, let alone a raw pig's head in front of them. Even if Washuk himself was lying on the chopping board, they would rush up and eat it clean. What for? Then he saw the old man casually lift the big pot full of boiling water on the stove and throw it aside. Then he put the bamboo basket he had been carrying on the stove. Huaishur narrowed his eyes and looked carefully. That thing was indeed a bamboo basket, but in the basket made of countless thin strips, it was dark, making it impossible to see what was inside. Only a faintly disturbing aura spread out from it. This was definitely a relic from the border, but it definitely should not be used to roast on the fire. It was not even a kitchen utensil at all, as if it was used casually. He poured ladle after ladle of cold water into it. Miraculously, the water did not seep out. Instead, it churned in the darkness between the bamboo strips and was quickly dyed with a layer of grayish black. What was inside that thing used to store? Huaishur felt his scalp tingling. It was as if he was facing a huge source of radiation from the abyss. He felt that radiation everywhere was spewing out from it. Even with the depth balancing device in the arena, Huaishur's overly sensitive perception was still uneasy and trembling. This old bastard, was he roasting some nuclear bomb with fire? Then he saw the old man, Washuk, grab the pig's head with one hand and throw it onto the grid on top of the bamboo basket. Finally, he covered it with the lid. Then He began to watch with folded arms. Don't mention anything like scallions, star anise, or fennel. He didn't even put a grain of salt in it. Steamed pig's head with water. Was this some F***king variant of boiled cabbage? Fleischer didn't need to look in the mirror to know that his expression was ugly. What the hell was this old bastard doing? As if he sensed Fleischer's gaze, the old man turned his head with a faint smile and sighed as if he was chatting. Actually, using a cauldron would be better. Unfortunately, it's a barbarian country after all. A bronze cauldron is not easy to find. There is one in the museum, but Xiao Hu's daughter won't let me take it no matter what. He helplessly clapped his hands and smiled. I can only make do with the traditional method. Cauldron, Fleischer felt a chill at the back of his head. This old man was just steaming a pig's head. Why would he need such a big thing like a cauldron? Wait, the corner of his eyes twitched, and he began to wonder if there was something wrong with his brain circuit. It seems like you've guessed it. Miss Fleischer really knows a lot about Dongsha culture. It's rare. Guo clapped his hands and smiled. The people of Yingzhou seem to care a lot about ancestry and lineage, right? This old man's background is also very extraordinary. How about it? Aren't you interested? Fleischer felt as if he was facing a great enemy when he was stared at by that pair of mocking and cold eyes, even if he wasn't his enemy at the moment. However, the ferocious feeling from the abyss crossed the barrier of depth and fell on Fleischer along with the gaze. It repeatedly lingered in his ears and turned into a strange whisper. Do you want to hear it? Do you? I guess you must be. Involuntarily, and at the same time, from the heart. Fleischer nodded. I knew it. Guo laughed proudly, but his expression was not serious at all. It was as if he didn't care at all. If you want to talk about it, the surname Guo was originally inherited from the Guo kingdom. If you trace it back further, it's the real emperor of Zhou, the Ji family. If the emperor of Mu didn't boast when he saw the queen mother of the West, this old man's lineage also has some divinity. In Fleischer's pocket, the fingers on the phone moved slightly. He only felt that the thread of inspiration in his mind was getting clearer and clearer. He was only one step away from the final answer. There's no need to investigate. This kind of ancestral glory has nothing to do with me, but there's nothing to hide. Guo glanced at him mischievously and directly said the answer before the Gui kingdom moved away. It was highly valued by the emperor of Zhou, who was a demigod at that time, and was given an important task. The position passed down was called Uncle Zong. Fleischer's fingers that were tapping on the phone stiffened in place. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck his brain, illuminating the darkness and pointing straight to the only answer. Uncle Zong. It could even be traced back to the official position of the ancient emperor of Eastern Xia, Zhuanxu. It was in charge of the etiquette of the state, and it also had the functions of the calendar, music, history, and so on. However, this was just a trivial matter. Among all its powers, the most important one was the sacrifice for the gods and ghosts of heaven and earth. It offered sacrifices at the 4 times when it appeared. It was in charge of the etiquette of gods, ghosts, and earth to help the king build and protect the state. If it was more familiar to the modern people, it would be called Grand Preceptor. The so-called Uncle Zong was the ultimate priest who represented the emperor in offering sacrifices to the gods and ghosts of heaven and earth. In the chaotic era, where gods and humans lived together, it was the highest divine position that mortals could reach. Fleischer's fingers were twitching wildly. He finally understood how hard it was for Hupe to control himself not to crush the phone. He suddenly understood. No wonder he wanted to use a pig's head. No wonder he was so confident. Indeed, if that was the case, even if there were twice as many people, if they weren't strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with him, it wouldn't be enough at all. This wasn't cooking. It was clearly cooking the sacrifice in offering sacrifices to the gods and ghosts. Aya, don't be so shocked. Actually, it's not that scary. It's just an exaggeration. Gwashuk waved his hand nonchalantly. The inheritance has been passed down until now, and there are only some unorthodox, insignificant skills. Moreover, I'm not the successor. FNMDP. Huaishur was expressionless and didn't respond at all. He sneered in his heart. Since the Duke of Zhou established the etiquette and cut off the inheritance of blood sacrifice, he replaced the etiquette of beasts with the etiquette of humans. From then on, all non-human ghosts and gods were abolished, and a new order was established. Eastern Xia bid farewell to the tragic and bloody blood sacrifice and turned to another path. As the miracle of the inheritor, Uncle Zong used the calendar to reset the movement of the stars and used etiquette to frame the order of all things. Even if he only passed down a little bit, it was enough for this old man to live like a fish in water in Eastern Xia's genealogy. Imperial prison or lesser prison? He couldn't be bothered to keep it a secret and directly asked. Chapter 668. Imperial prison? It's not that exaggerated. Besides, it's too tiring. I have to prepare 4 to 5 days in advance, bathe, and fast. I'm old and can't take it. Gwashuk shrugged and knocked on the bamboo basket beside him. He smiled faintly and said, "Today, I'll wash my hands and make soup. I'll make a imperial prison for everyone." He. Huaishur's expression became more and more numb. It was as if he was watching a cheater using an anti-aircraft gun to bully refugees who only had 2 AKs. Old bastard, where's your face? Not far away, a few culinary demons who were not familiar with Dongxia looked over. They had no idea what they were talking about. They were waiting for Huaishur's further explanation. However, Huaishur was not interested in being a commentator. He just rolled his eyes and said, "You guys can just treat this old man as a pretentious prick." Anyway, if he was not lying, the result of the competition was already clear. This was a sacrifice for the Shangshi feudal lord. That guy was really steaming a nuclear warhead. He closed his eyes and sighed silently. In the silence, only the old man with one hand holding the steamer was humming in a low voice. He shook his head and sang a tune that had fallen behind many years ago. Those songs that were no longer known by people. Suddenly, the crisp sound of the kitchen bell rang. 15 minutes and 8 seconds. Chai Chuanchuang finished cooking. "I'm done." In front of the kitchen table, the middle-aged culinary demon raised his head and announced solemnly, "It's only a short time. Don't be anxious. You can take your time." Gwashuk comforted him. "There's no rush. I'm done." Chai Chuanchuang raised his voice and announced again. Gwashuk was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "It seems that you can't wait anymore. Very good, very good. I'm also very curious. What kind of dish can an opponent who goes all out and even surpasses his previous level produce? Can we start now?" He grinned and sat at the side of the table, full of expectation. "Huaishur Dingshur, Snow Moonflower. Please enjoy." Chai Chuanchuang took off his headscarf and personally played the role of a waiter. He brought the appetizer to the table and presented a pair of white chopsticks at the same time. It was made of ivory. The ceramic bowl that held the appetizer looked ordinary and crude, but if one looked closely, they could feel the charming curve and the gorgeous color hidden under the plain gray. Underneath the dishes, there was a gorgeous dark gold color, giving off a heavy feeling of brilliance. Without a doubt, this was the work of a master. The side dishes on the plate were even more exquisite and frightening. The deep-fried jade was decorated with cherry blossoms and wrapped in fine fish roe. Together with the fresh fish paste, the aroma of fresh fish assailed their nostrils. That restrained and dignified, luxurious aura spread out. It was just a side dish, but it was enough to make some of the poor audience breathless, especially Maki. The mixed-race girl's saliva was about to drip down. If this was a cartoon, the eyes would have turned into dollar signs. Originally, Huaishe should also be in the special attack range. But Feng Shu's food was too delicious, and he didn't like other dishes at all. He only felt that it was gaudy. It's so exquisite that I can't bear to eat it. Guishuk picked up the chopsticks and sighed. Compared to your teacher, your skills have improved. Mr. Chai Chuan, the lintel of Dayan will be glorified by you. Don't talk too much. Please eat, sir. Chai Chuan said proudly. That's it. Guishuk grabbed the chopsticks and looked down at the side dishes on the plate. He frowned. Can't you be more nimble and bring it all up? Chai Chuan was expressionless. Sir, this is dining etiquette. Even if you're arrogant, don't go too far. You're so stingy, outrageous. Guishuk shook his head, mocking and contemptuous. It's because of such idiots that Zen can't be free. The old man picked up the luxurious fish cake with his ivory chopsticks, opened his mouth, and easily swallowed the exquisite appetizer. He could feel the fragrance spreading between his lips and teeth, like a rich and noble incense, leading him to the luxurious palace. But when the taste gradually disappeared between his lips and teeth, all the gorgeous and solemn illusions instantly collapsed and disappeared. The high-rise buildings turned into nothingness, and the noble and beautiful women fell into the yellow soil. Time made everything vanish into thin air. It only made people feel lost. Only the bell of the garden abode rang, describing the impermanence of the world, the confusion of the mortal world, and alerting people the original meaning should be like this, right? Guishuk nodded with satisfaction. It's worthy of the stone cuisine from Zen, like the white bone temple. It makes people realize that everything is empty and turn to seek liberation and enlightenment. It can be said to be ingenious. He picked up the chopsticks again and picked up the 8 inches that was presented. It was a cuisine composed of sashimi, white silk sea urchin, tofu, and other exquisite side dishes. It was still so exquisite, so gorgeous, and surrounded by the aura of wealth. It was as if a beauty was sitting in his arms, caressing his cheeks, and moaning emotionally. It's so good, so good. Guishuk chuckled as he swallowed with large mouthfuls, and he enjoyed the boundless riches, the boundless tenderness, and the boundless satisfaction and splendor he had hoped for. He just shook his head in pity. Unfortunately, the vision is too small. At that moment, Chai Chuan frowned. Just as he was about to say something, the old man raised his eyes and ordered solemnly, "Continue. Let's see if your endless glory can satisfy this old man. Let's see if this old man can transcend from your work. Thousands of buildings, thousands of people, hundreds of millions of assets, beautiful wives, beautiful maids, and endless luxuries of the world appeared in front of his eyes, and then everything quickly faded away. Everything became emptiness, and everything withered like dust. In this continuous eating, everything flowed, but in the end, everything returned to nothingness. Even the arrogant and ferocious Guishuk's expression gradually calmed down. He felt the calmness and zen from the heart, ushering in an epiphany and liberation. Immediately, a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. That's it. Chai Chuan's expression froze. Even if he had expected it, he did not expect the scene in front of him. It was not that his work could not let him understand the emptiness and tranquility of Zen. It was that this old man had long abandoned such results like a pair of worn-out shoes. No, It was even far beyond his own attainments. This old bastard did not even put the Arhot's Buddhahood in his eyes. It was true, the evil was deep. If you ask me, this is too troublesome, isn't it? Gwashuk held the miscellaneous food in his hand and tasted the glory flowing on the tip of his tongue. He asked in confusion, isn't it very simple to be free? It's much easier than this gaudy set. Chai Chuan Chuang was stunned, and his expression was stiff. He was about to refute this evil, but he saw the old man's smile gradually become more and more ferocious and violent. You want to understand the Dharma, but don't be confused by others. From inside to outside, eat whatever you see. Eat Buddha when you see Buddha. Eat ancestors when you see ancestors. Eat Arhat when you see Arhat. Eat parents when you see parents. Eat relatives when you see relatives. He raised the bowl and drank the soup of the miscellaneous food in one gulp. He crushed the lacquer bowl inlaid with gold with one hand and laughed strangely. Only then can you be free, not bound by things, and free. Do you understand, little brat? If you don't completely devour this obsession, the so-called detachment, the so-called enlightenment, will always be the moon in the mirror, the flowers in the water. The old man raised his chopsticks and ordered arrogantly, now bring all your little toys here at once, all of them. Chai Chuan Chuang had forgotten what happened next, as if he had fallen into a daze. He numbly followed the old man's orders and presented all the dishes. In the end, he watched the old man swallow them all. He did not even burp. He smiled contemptuously. He did not even bother to say, "That's all." He just wiped his mouth casually, raised his head, and asked, "Next, it's this old man's turn, right?" In the silence, Chai Chuan Chuang felt fear from the bottom of his heart. It was difficult to understand, the last of his courage, but he could not escape. He sat in front of the cooking table. Even though he knew that he could not win, he still attacked the enemy again. Very good. I like people who keep pestering. An enemy who is not affected by fear has the value of going all out. Chai Chuan Chuang, you are indeed a qualified cooking demon. You are qualified to enjoy this old man's junior prison. Gwashuk raised his hand, threw the steamer away, and placed the steamed pig head meat in front of Chai Chuan Chuang. Please enjoy, Chai Chuan Chuang. If you really have a plan, what was this? Chai Chuan Chuang looked at the thing in front of him in shock. It was a pig head steamed with water. There was no salt, no pepper, and no seasoning. Except for the meat itself, there was no taste. There was even a faint smell of blood. Even so, Chai Chuan Chuang still couldn't help but want to eat it. To be exact, he wanted to have it. He wanted to get it. He wanted to let this overly tempting meat fragrance fall into his stomach. An incredible thirst. His eyes were burning red. The emptiness that had been in meditation for decades disappeared without a trace. It seems that your skill is not very good. You broke the golden body, just like that. Gwashuk chuckled strangely, but he did not urge him. He just stood aside and watched. He quietly watched the show that was about to happen. In the eyes of others, Chai Chuan Chuang seemed to be possessed by a demon. He fell into a daze. His chopsticks were suspended in the air, and he was in a daze. Soon after, he let out a strange cry and jumped up from his chair. It was unbelievable. It's biting me. Everyone was stunned and looked at him in confusion. Everyone saw it clearly. How could a half-steamed pig's head bite someone? But Chai Chuan Chuang was not necessarily talking nonsense. He was just making people hallucinate. There were many ways to do that. After calming down, Chai Chuan Chuang once again reached out his chopsticks to the food in front of him. He made up his mind. Even if the pig had opened its mouth to bite him this time, he would never let it go. In this way, he fell into a daze again. Even if he was bitten by the illusory pig head, he did not let go or retreat. He was going to hold this overly glorious and tempting power in his hands. In the silence, There was a surprised cry. Chai Chuan Chuang, who was in a daze, suddenly trembled. 3 of his fingers were missing, the pighead's closed mouth slightly arched, and one could vaguely see the extra fingers in its mouth. A chill suddenly came and engulfed everyone. The dish that was supposed to be eaten by people was eating people at this moment. Power can eat people. Isn't this normal? It's the privilege of a feudal lord. Guishuk smiled strangely and mockingly reminded him, "Be careful. If the dignified cooking demon is eaten by a pig, it would be too ugly, right?" Chai Chuan Chuang could no longer hear him. He was climbing. Intoxicated by the fragrance that no one could resist, he was climbing toward the throne in the void. He finally saw the power to rule the world. Chapter 669. What hit him in the face was a terrifying cold wind that he had never experienced before. When Chai Chuan Chuang came back to his senses, he was already standing at the top of the mountain. He looked up and could stare at the magnificent and heroic halo. It danced in the air like an aurora, occupying the sky and easily dyeing everything with its own color. He had never seen such a magnificent peak, dangerous and noble. When it appeared in front of him, everything in the world ceased to exist because it was the hub of heaven and earth. It was so cold, but he could not feel fear, because there was an unexpected and terrifying flame burning in his chest, dispelling the cold that was not worth mentioning. It burned his eyes red and urged him to go forward. He was challenging the perilous peak where countless corpses had been buried, even if there were constant screams, along with the thin bodies falling from the sky and smashing into meat paste beside him. The splashing blood fell on his face, bringing with it a tempting sweet fragrance. Every time he climbed, there was a step of joy, just like everything he had experienced in the past. From the moment he was born, competition began in kindergarten. Students could only be enslaved. The class monitor had the right to eat first and could freely choose milk, but he still had to listen to the teacher and run for the teacher's orders. But the teacher had to listen to the headmaster, no matter how unreasonable the teaching requirements were. He had to meet them. When the headmaster met some students' parents, he had to put on a smiling face and try his best to please them. In front of the school board and investors, everyone's efforts became a set of numbers written on the exaggerated smiling faces, and they were free to choose. The newcomer had to pour tea for the senior, and the senior had to greet the class monitor. The class monitor was nothing in front of the CEO, but the CEO also had to bow to the servant, to the higher class monitor. In the human world, there was a hierarchy. The invisible floors separated the height and shrouded everything in it. To please the master and become the chief senior brother, he could freely order other apprentices to deal with the chores for him. To get the skills and become a chef, he could get rid of the mischief at the bottom of the pyramid. When he looked up, he could see the general's cold face. To surpass his classmates, colleagues, and teachers, step by step, he hung his name above the name of the great Dean. But was this enough? Why did he stop? When he looked at the other mediocre colleagues around him, he was puzzled. Wasn't this just the beginning? He struggled to climb upwards, forgetting everything. Appraised as a one-star culinary demon. Independent. After completing his apprenticeship, he would be able to earn a huge amount of money. But no matter how much money he had, it was meaningless. Once he obtained 2 stars, he would be able to control the Great Een One and become a general who kept his word. He would be able to walk under the spotlight and bask in the envious gazes of everyone. But it was still limited to the signboard of Deen, buried by the glory of the previous generation. With a 3-star rating, the Chai Chuan clan would be able to form their own faction. They would be able to look down on others and laugh proudly at their peers. Then it went up even further until the courtiers bowed their heads and the physicians saluted. Even in front of the High Emperor, he could talk cheerfully and humorously. That's right, as long as I move forward, all of my opponents will crawl under my feet. Chai Chuan Chuang strode toward the throne of the Devil Chef's Peak. Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. In front of the dining table, Chai Chuan Chuang's arm was already exposed to the bone. Sweat constantly dripped from his forehead and face. He was drenched in sweat. He panted heavily. Between the bones of his fingers, a pair of trembling chopsticks was unable to cross the final line. He was only 1 step away from the end. Only 1 step left. What a pity it ends here. Guishuk looked down at his miserable opponent with pity. Above his head, the cold light sprinkled down, and a huge shadow spread out, covering that pale face. In that instant, under the peak, the terrifying snowstorm came to an abrupt end. Chai Chuan Chuang finally saw behind the thousands of neon lights in the sky the sinister shadow and the pair of indifferent and mocking eyes. He looked down. He gazed at the struggling ant in his palm. Darkness enveloped everything in an instant. When the beautiful illusion dissipated, the flame of ambition in his heart had unknowingly dissipated, replaced by an empty space. He lowered his head and saw the gap in his chest as well as the wriggling faces of the poisonous insects nibbling at his lungs. They were laughing maliciously at him. When he embraced power, it was also devouring him. At this moment, the magnificent peak finally revealed its malevolence. After the snow faded, only a wriggling scarlet was left. Countless broken limbs piled up in a complicated manner, and countless broken skulls were arranged in rows. Stinky blood flowed out from the gaps, crawling through the distorted faces and empty eyes. The tragic mountain formed by the piles of corpses reverberated with a terrifying, shrill laughter. Tentacles stretched out from it, pulling his broken arms and body inwards, shrinking little by little. "Go away, go away," Chai Chuan Chuang screamed, roaring furiously as he struggled with all his might. He staggered backward. Even though he had woken up from the illusion, he still couldn't get rid of the terrifying nightmare, nor could he escape from the empty gaze of the pig head in front of him. The cracked face was quickly twisting, but no blood could seep out. In the mournful wail, the last bit of his consciousness collapsed. He completely fainted. In the dead silence, only the faces of the other 6 demon chefs gradually darkened. Their expressions twitched, and their faces turned ashen. On the plate, the pig head was still intact. Not only did the aroma not disperse with the passing of the temperature, but it became more and more alluring under the offerings of the sacrificial victims. It was tempting the next victim to come on stage. However, no one took a step forward. No matter how patiently they waited, no one spoke. "What's wrong? What's wrong, everyone?" Guashuk sneered softly, looking at the complicated faces. "You're retreating just like this. You're scared just like this. Is there only one person who failed?" Someone couldn't hold back his anger and uneasiness, growling in a low voice. "This kind of thing, can it really be considered a dish? Why not? The so-called pig is for people to eat, isn't it? It's just that the requirements for the customers are a little higher. Otherwise, why would it be called the junior prison? This is the privilege of the nobles." Guashuk grinned, revealing his jagged, sharp teeth, just like a monster showing off his weapon. He grinned hideously. "You should be able to feel it, right? This is the weight of the country. No matter how greedy you are, after death you will turn into a vengeful spirit to plot against the country. You will feel satisfied in front of this junior prison. But if you don't have amazing courage, if you don't have the ambition and means of a ruler of a city or a country, you won't be able to enjoy such a privilege. If you don't have the courage, don't mention the position of the House of Representatives. If you don't have the virtue to match the position, there will be disaster. Incompetent people who only looked impressive, while people who only knew how to seek personal gain, and idiots who did not know their own worth deserved to be devoured. No matter how pitiful and sad you are, you can only blame yourself. Come, let me see your structure. Let me see where your courage lies." In the tyrannical laughter, Guashuk slowly opened his arms. A huge shadow covered the entire arena, and countless teeth hidden in the darkness slowly revealed from the deepest part of the soul, dripping with sticky saliva, with indescribable malice and hunger. From the top, he looked down and asked mockingly, "Today, can you let me eat to my heart's content?" Huaishur lowered his eyes. "Let's go, Maki." Huaishur slowly got up and told her, "There's no need to watch anymore. That old ghost, from the beginning, was here to torture people. This kind of dish that was enough to eat ghosts and gods. When brought here, it was simply a cross-latitude attack. No matter how powerful Kung Fu was, it couldn't beat a foreign gun. No matter how many opponents there were, it was useless against a two-directional foil." If it wasn't for the royal family, who was connected to the country's destiny, who didn't have the blood of divinity, and who wasn't the kind of hero of 100 generations who could strive for the position of a duke from scratch, it was absolutely impossible to eat that thing. After thousands of years of inheritance, What the junior prison represented was this terrifying weight of the country, not to mention what kind of things were hidden in the dish. From the beginning, it stood in an invincible position, but it also used all kinds of despicable means to mess with the opponent's mentality. It was like whipping the corpse after a massacre. He was excessively strong and despicable. There was no weakness that could be exploited. It was simply invulnerable. "Don't you want to try it, Miss Weisher?" As if he could sense the figure leaving behind him, Shook asked without looking back. "In my humble opinion, there are not many people here who can enjoy this junior prison except for you. If there's a chance." Weisher responded expressionlessly. Young Master Ming could eat it, and so could the Prince of Paradise. Whether it was the identity of a disaster musician or the leader of a large group, he had enough status and capital to enjoy such treatment. But now was not the time. He didn't have the confidence to win. By the way, there's another good news to announce. Before leaving, he suddenly heard Guo Shuk's raised voice. The old man looked back happily, grinned, and smiled at the audience outside the field. "Tomorrow, the challenge will continue. I will randomly choose half of the remaining culinary demons to be my opponents. This old man can't take turns to fight, so please be prepared. By the way, if Miss Weisher wants to come, you're welcome at any time. Anywhere is fine." The monster in the shadow chuckled strangely. "Putting aside other irrelevant things, I think you are the only opponent who can bring me a surprise. Please do your best when the time comes." Weisher's footsteps paused for a moment, and he looked back, looking at the pair of eyes full of darkness and hell. He told him, "I will." With Weisher's departure, the competition continued. No, it should be said that the one-sided massacre had just begun. But in the audience outside the arena, there were culinary demons constantly getting up, turning around, and leaving. They didn't look back, and their footsteps were hurried as if they were fleeing. At this moment, more than half of the people who left had made up their minds to withdraw. Their minds had been completely defeated by such a tragic scene. In the dead silence, there was only hoarse laughter. The monster from Taiching Heavy Industry, with his own strength, had engraved a terrifying shadow in everyone's hearts and used this unparalleled strength to destroy all confidence. "Run away, children, run away quickly, because your invincible enemy is here." Until they left the arena and returned to their residence, Weisher didn't speak again. That's too much. Why did he target Miss Weisher? "The sullen Jun," she complained. "Isn't he the representative of cousin Hupa? Shouldn't we all be comrades?" "For that old thing, the word comrade is too cheap, and it has no meaning." Weisher shook his head. "As long as they are standing on the arena, they are all his enemies. Not recognizing anyone is the real essence of the battle between culinary demons. If a comrade blocks the way, then kill the comrade together and defeat him. For such a huge monster like him, did he really need such a thing as a comrade? Who knows, we might really have to fight in the end." Weisher rubbed the space between her eyebrows. "I have to start preparing too." Jeanne, she looked up in surprise. "But I don't want to be the patriarch." Weisher was speechless. Wasn't it a little too early to start worrying about being the patriarch? "Do you really think I'm going to win? Wasn't this confidence a little too much? Although I feel that the old man is very strong, I feel that Miss Weisher isn't weak either." "Jeanne," she said seriously, "if it were up to me, Miss Weisher will definitely win in the end." In the silence, Weisher laughed softly and rubbed her hair. "Then I'll take your blessings." After waving her hand and saying good night, Miss Weisher went back to her room and closed the door. Then she started to panic. After flipping through the cookbook for the whole night, she finally saw her future from between the lines. "It's hopeless. Just wait for death. Goodbye." There was no suspense in the outcome of the battle between culinary demons. 7 people lost miserably. Stone, ramen, sashimi, sushi, peony pot. All the dishes were eaten by Guashuk as if they were side dishes, but he still wasn't full. In the end, no one was able to successfully put Xiaolong on their plate. On the contrary, after the competition ended, Guashuk, who still felt that it wasn't enough, made himself a plate of dipping sauce, tore the pig's head meat with his hands, and ate it clean. In front of all his opponents, from his ears to his brain, there wasn't a single piece left. He chewed on the terrifying essence of the abyss wantonly. After that, he only burped. He carried his bamboo basket and casually turned around and left, as if he was an old man walking his bird. Only dead silence and tragic scene were left. As he was leaving the arena, Vladimir received a phone call. "Okay, I'll be there right away." 10 minutes later, he saw his employer, who hadn't shown up since the beginning of the battle between the culinary demons. He looked like he was aging prematurely. There were spots of white on his beard and hair. A middle-aged man in a suit was sitting on the sofa, muttering to himself. It was his employer, Masahiro Rimi. More people called this man Sergei, Salesh Satomi. Although he was the eldest son of the main family, among all the candidates for the head of the family, he had the weakest relationship with the family. Ever since he left home and went to the Russian Federation, he had no financial dealings with the family. Over the years, he had been traveling between the Russian Federation and Africa as a traveler and businessman on the surface. Not many people knew what kind of business he was doing behind the scenes. Many people knew that he was very rich, very powerful, and had many close friends in the upper echelons of the Russian Federation government. Other than that, everything else was hidden in the fog. Vladimir wasn't interested in this, nor was he in awe or anything. After walking in, he greeted him warmly. "Oh, what have you been busy with these 2 days? Long time no see." She rummaged through his liquor cabinet and found a bottle of whiskey. Then she began to pour it into his mouth. "Walia, you'd better not speak Japanese. The name Dana-sen doesn't sound right." Masahiro Rimi shook his head, sighed, and asked, "Did you watch tonight's duel?" Vladimir nodded. "What do you think?" "Well, that old man is indeed a bit too strong. But boss, you don't have to worry, just leave it to me. No matter what kind of monster it is, I can fight it." Vladimir showed off his biceps. "My tough steak is invincible. It's good to have confidence." Masahiro Rimi pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "However, I will issue a challenge for you tomorrow." "What about the opponent?" "Who is it?" "Kaori Kiriko." An unexpected name came out of Masahiro Rimi's mouth. In an instant, Vladimir came to a realization. In order to avoid being attacked by Guashuk, he had chosen an opponent for himself in advance. Avoiding a strong opponent in the middle of the game and avoiding losses was a brilliant idea. Vladimir didn't mind. No matter how reckless he was as a warrior, he still knew tactics. Temporarily retreating was even more shameless, not to mention that he had long been interested in Miss Kaori Kiriko. "Change of plan. Do you understand what I mean, Walia?" Masahiro Rimi suddenly said. The muscular cooking demon was stunned for a moment and nodded. "Leave it to me, boss. I'm sorry for making such a request. That's not in the contract." Masahiro Rimi thought for a moment and asked, "I'll add extra money. It's still the Whale Protection Association, right?" "It's changed its name now." Vladimir corrected him. "We've recently joined forces with the Indonesian Marine Environmental Protection Association and Northern Shipping to operate it. It's called the Pacific Rim Rare Marine Animal Protection Association. You can do whatever you want. I'll just give you all the remuneration in advance." Masahiro Rimi took out a checkbook and scribbled. He raised his head and asked, $100 million US, is that enough? Vladimir nodded frantically. Masahiro Remy thought for a moment and added another 30 million. Thank you, boss. Boss is so nice. The muscular cooking demon took the check with a smile and whistled. Then he carefully put it into the innermost pocket of his toolbox. In this case, I have the funds for the next 2 years. Walia, you're not young anymore, right? Can't you take the money yourself? Masahiro Remy shook his head. You're already in your 30s. It's time for you to settle down and find a wife to raise your children, right? It's still too early for me to educate my descendants. I can still fight for at least another 30 years. Children and whatnot, we'll talk about it in 30 years. Vladimir patted his chest and said seriously, the key is still to realize your dreams. Dreams. Protect the blue sea and the earth. Isn't that good? Masahiro Remy was speechless, so he got up and said goodbye. You're leaving just like that? Aren't you going to watch my competition? I'm sorry. I still have a meeting with the Ministry of Defense tomorrow morning. Although it's just a procedure, I still have to be there. Masahiro Remy sighed, regretfully, and finally patted him on the shoulder. I'll leave the rest to you. How cold. I feel like I'm a mistress who's been abandoned. Vladimir laughed and drank all the whiskey in the bottle in one gulp. As his 5 fingers tightened, the glass bottle let out a sharp wail. It didn't fall apart. Instead, it shrank inch by inch. Finally, it turned into a pocket-sized toy in his closed palm. Leave it to me. He placed the small bottle on the table and turned around to leave. 10 minutes later, under the light pressure of the bottle, the entire table fell apart. That night, at 12:06 p.m., the battle suddenly broke out on the edge of the downtown area of Nara. It ended at 12:10 p.m. After paying a terrible price, the murderer Sasaki Kayomesa was arrested and brought to justice. Chapter 670. He didn't die. This was Sasaki Kayomesa's first thought when he woke up. After the explosion, the attack, and the merciless attack, he was still alive. Was he merciful? No, it should be said that compared to killing him, he wanted to put the blame on him. In the ward in the cage, in the monotonous rhythm of the mechanical heart, Sasaki opened his eyes and saw the cold light of the incandescent lamp above his head. The wounds have been bandaged. The damage to the lungs and liver needs to be nursed for a while, but it's not a big problem. Excessive blood loss is not a big problem for an ascendant. You just need to lie down for a while. Behind the blue curtain, there was an old figure sitting upright. He didn't care about the patient's body, smoking a pipe. He didn't know how long he had been smoking, but the whole cage was filled with smoke. The humming exhaust fan was spinning rapidly, but the pungent smell still made Sasaki cough. He looked down in silence, saw his almost broken body that was pieced together again, and finally saw his right leg, as well as the brace and plaster installed on it. "My leg, what happened?" he asked. Before he fainted, he didn't remember having such a scar. "I broke it myself," the old man outside the curtain said, to be on the safe side. "You really took a lot of trouble, Inu Jiang." Sasaki smiled indifferently and closed his eyes. The mockery didn't make Inu Jiang angry. The old man just casually knocked the pipe on the table. After knocking out the ash, he put in a pot of tobacco, carefully pressed it, and lit it again. "This is for your own good," he said. Sasaki didn't speak. "Don't worry about Satoichi. That guy is much more cunning than you. He has already escaped." Inu Jiang said, "The blind man used stun bombs. It's really beyond my expectations." Sasaki's fingers contracted slightly, but there was no response. What else was there to say? He jumped into a trap. From the beginning to the end, it was an ambush for him. He was outnumbered, but he was also captured and accused of being a murderer. Even if he died, he couldn't be innocent. It was like a joke. Since you've already left, why bother coming back? Quan Jiang sighed softly. I heard that you're doing well in the ivory tower. You have a new job and a new life. You shouldn't have come back. You shouldn't have exposed yourself when you killed Riken Bushido, right? Sasaki suddenly raised his eyes, and a sharp breath suddenly rose from his rough and haggard appearance, like a samurai holding the hilt of a sword, coldly questioning. Quan Jiang didn't say anything as he silently smoked his pipe. He didn't deny it. He was the one who killed Rigen Bushido with his own hands that night. The one who did it was not murderous demon, but Quan Jiang. Sasaki, who had once received Inu Jiang's guidance on swordsmanship, saw this scene clearly when he traced it back. After so many years, Inu Jiang executive, you still haven't changed the habit of Shuizhen and can Xian. Sasaki asked softly, why? Or did you do it on purpose? Why did you disguise yourself as a murderous demon to kill him? Quan Jiang didn't speak, but Sasaki pressed on step by step and raised his voice, because Riken Bushido knows who the real murderous demon is, right? Once he says it and is used by someone with bad intentions, the Riken family will be completely defeated because the murderous demon is hiding in the Riken family. No, I'm the murderous demon. You guessed wrong, Sasaki. The old man behind the curtain knocked the pipe in his hand. After knocking off the last ash, he slowly got up and bowed. I'm sorry for framing you. I fell into the evil path and indulged in the pleasure of killing people. When people get old, they will feel the decline of their strength. Unwilling to be old, I chose to drink blood and live again to maintain my vitality. He calmly said, please rest assured that after the matter is over, I will surrender myself to Looming Hall, plead for Caesarean, and clear your name. Before that, please have a good rest. Soon, everything will be settled. In this way, after taking a few steps back, he turned and left without any reluctance. What kind of bullshit reason is this? But the man who was bound to the hospital bed was not happy because he could wash away the injustice. Instead, he flew into a rage and roared, Quan Jiang! Quan Jiang! What the hell are you doing? I'm doing the right thing. Quan Jiang replied without turning his head, doing what a samurai should do. In this way, the Riken family will be preserved. Is the preserved thing really the original Riken family? Sasaki struggled with all his might, regardless of the wound bursting open and the blood spreading. Such shameless boasting, you old man. Do you really know how to write the word shame? Are you worthy of the Riken family's trust in you? Quan Jiang's footsteps paused for a moment, and then he said indifferently, you and I are both samurai. You should know the importance of kindness. Don't take it for granted to judge others with the thinking of a wild dog. A wild dog also knows right and wrong. Quan Jiang was silent for a moment and was amused. He shook his head indifferently. He was conscious of how ridiculous the argument was. It doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. As long as the Riken family can survive, as long as it can be maintained, it's fine. Even if it's just an empty shell, I can go to Lord Zhongzong to receive punishment after I die. The hunchbacked old man took one last look at him and tiredly said, that's all I can do. He didn't care about the angry roar behind him. He closed the door. Watch him. Finally, he said to the supervisor, if he acts rashly, there's no harm in killing him. The supervisor nodded indifferently. Quan Jiang didn't look back. He went straight up, passed through layers of defense, and saw Jiao Shan waiting at the door. Where is he? He asked. He's already here. Jiao Shan said, he's waiting for you. Quan Jiang nodded and walked straight to the heavily guarded quiet room. He passed through the corridors and doors and pushed open the last paper door. He saw the young samurai kneeling under the painting. As if he had already foreseen something, his eyes drooped, and his expression didn't change. He couldn't see the impulsiveness and impatience that he usually deliberately showed. He no longer concealed the sinister, fox-like look in his eyes. "I've made you wait for a long time. Jiu Jing." Quan Jiang closed the door behind him and sat across from him. "I think you should know why I called you here today." "Yes, I've made you work hard to remove the traces for me." The young samurai bowed his head and sat down. He expressed his gratitude to the old man. "I originally thought that a person like me wouldn't be able to hide from an elder like Mr. Quan Jiang. It seems that this day came faster than I expected." He said, "I am a murderous demon." Without any concealment, he answered Quan Jiang's question honestly and straightforwardly. But Quan Jiang didn't feel any anger or sadness. He only felt a deep exhaustion in his numbness. There were too many waves, too many storms. There were also too many changes. Unknowingly, everything had become completely different from the past. It was completely different from what he knew. But after so many years of being clumsy and sewing, when such a huge hole appeared in front of him, he didn't even feel fear. Instead, he had the urge to smile bitterly. This day had finally come. "You've done better than you said, Jiu Jing. Better than anyone. Before Bujing escaped, I didn't even suspect you." In the silence, he lowered his eyes and sighed softly, almost pleadingly. "Let's stop here, Jiu Jing. There's still a chance to redeem everything." In the silence, no one spoke again. In the long silence, the young samurai seemed to be distracted. He raised his head in a daze and stared at the solemn, quiet room in front of him. For a long time, "Mr. Quan Jiang," he said softly, "I have two fathers. One of my fathers was a good-for-nothing. He raised me up and thought that he was kind and loved me. He thought that he could obtain power. There was another father who was arrogant and shallow. He turned me into what I am now. He thought that he was generous and thought that he could play everyone in the palm of his hand. One of them taught me indifference, the other taught me pain. But now both of my fathers are dead." He lowered his head and laughed as if he was mocking himself. "I still remember before my mother died. My biological father was kind and loving. I also remember when my adoptive father ascended the throne, he was full of mettle and wanted to achieve great things. But until the end, they were not able to get happiness. All they got was pain and death. They were not able to fulfill their wishes. Even if they lost everything, even they were changed beyond recognition." He said, "Maybe they shouldn't have been born in this family, just like me." Just like that, the young samurai bowed his head calmly and apologized to the old man in front of him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Quan Jiang. I went against your expectations and trust. There's no turning back for me." Should he say it was anger or regret? But Quan Jiang found that he couldn't feel anything. There was only a sense of loss, emptiness, and indescribable sadness. Such shrewdness could have been entrusted to the family. "No, Mr. Quan Jiang, I don't want to see the family." Jiu Jing said, "I just want to destroy it." At that moment, the young samurai drew his sword. But it was too late. Quan Jiang looked down gloomily and didn't want to look anymore. The moment he walked into this quiet room, he had already fallen into a tight encirclement. Now, the 8 canine warriors of the Rigian family were already lurking outside the quiet room. As long as Jiu Jing made the slightest move, what awaited him was only death. In the silence, there was the sound of slashing. Scarlet spurted out and dyed the calligraphy and paintings on the wall red. When the turbid blood dripped down again and landed on Quan Jiang's face, he slowly raised his head in a daze and looked at the unharmed Jiu Jing in front of him, and the 5 fingers that pierced through his chest from behind him. "Horn Mountain," The silent and determined samurai didn't draw his sword. He just raised his 5 fingers and tore the old man's back with a sharp edge like gold and iron. He took the heart and pierced through the chest. He slowly tightened his grip. The weak and vigorous heart fell apart. Horn Mountain, when? He asked tiredly. Since a long time ago, Master Quan Jiang. The indifferent samurai replied expressionlessly. Jiu Jing's thoughts are the same as mine. The Rigian family that is struggling at death's door can only bring endless pain, just like what you have always felt when the mixed-race girl who lived a peaceful life at the border was dragged into this ugly conflict. He had already sensed it the moment she was dragged into the conflict. What kind of hell had the Rigian family that he guarded become? He said, "It is time to end all of this." Quan Jiang panted tiredly. He just raised his eyebrows and laughed as if he was mocking himself. He closed his eyes and waited for death to come. Horn Mountain slowly retracted his hand and took out a handkerchief to wipe away the blood. Jiu Jing held her sword and walked forward step by step. "Thank you for your care and sacrifice over the years. The Rigian family failed to meet your expectations. I am very sorry." She slowly raised her sword and pointed it at Quan Jiang's neck. Jiu Jing finally said goodbye. "Please rest." In that moment, there was a thunderous roar. Lightning shot out from the nothingness, because when Quan Jiang opened his eyes from his pair of turbid eyes, a brilliant and blazing light shot out. The old and tired body reversed time at this moment. Ignoring the erosion of time and the entanglement of pain, she pulled out her sword, stepped forward, and slashed. The dying old lion, in this moment, burst forth with her final ferocity. The miracle of the Yatsufusa appeared here and disappeared in an instant. The two crossed each other. A deep scar appeared on Jiu Jing's face, almost splitting her face into 2. But now, the scars were slowly closing up and rapidly recovering to the point of being new. It was impossible to see how close she was to death. In the sound of staggering footsteps, the blade in Quan Jiang's hand shattered. Blood spurted out from his chest, taking away the last of his breath. The old and broken body finally fell, letting out a low sound. It was like a bubble bursting. Maybe that was the sound of waking up from a long daydream. Finally, it was over. "I am sorry, Master Zhongzong. I am sorry. I am already unable to save the Rigian family." He closed his eyes for the last time and prayed silently, "Please punish me Chapter 671. Something wasn't quite right. Ever since he woke up in the morning, Huaishur had been scrolling through the menu with one hand and brushing his teeth with the other. He rinsed his mouth listlessly and sneezed. He had a feeling that he had neglected something, or rather, he had a premonition that he couldn't feel at ease. Perhaps it was the enormous pressure brought about by Guashuk that made him start to waver. He couldn't continue to face the competition as calmly as before. Even if he was hired as a tool, he would definitely fake the competition in the end. Even if he lost to Guashuk, it didn't matter. It wouldn't change the final result. But what was inconceivable was that after witnessing the opponent's terrifying strength, Huaishur, who had been provoked, couldn't help but have a trace of the illusion that if he worked harder, he might be able to win. He wanted to win. Anyone would have such thoughts, even if they were giving away their lives in the game, or if they immediately went offline after harvesting the economy, or if they didn't deal any damage, or even if a healer took 4 gold medals for dealing damage. Once they started playing the game, anyone would want to win. When Huaishur realized this, he had already treated Guashuk as his enemy, even if he was the representative of that stinky sister of Hupa. Then came the problem. With his dog's heart and dog's face, how could he compete with him on the same stage? Even if he constantly learned and improved during the competition, and now the cooking demon skills and abilities had been qualitatively improved, he still couldn't be compared to Guashuk, who had been immersed in this field for more than 150 years. An outside trick? No, that old man always had a way of playing with people. He might be even better at using outside tricks than him. It wasn't impossible for him to dig out his identity from Hupa and then expose it on the spot during the competition. After all, that old man didn't look like a docile and obedient tool. Once he was in the mood, it wouldn't be strange for him to do something crazy. At worst, he would turn hostile and chop people up. Although there was a high probability that even if he turned hostile and chopped people up, at least he wouldn't lose face, right? It felt like once he started to think this way, it was already too late. Huaishur scratched his head, sat on the sofa, and continued to ponder, until he was awakened by Maki. Vladimir challenged me by name? Huaishur was stunned at first when he heard the news she brought. Then he realized what was going on and couldn't help laughing. He was so angry that he said, "Are they afraid that Lao Gu will treat them as a pushover, so they are using me as a lightning rod?" Zhan Shi understood and immediately stood up. "If that's the case, then I'll let them leave immediately." "No need." Huaishur raised his hand. Although saying, "I don't care," might seem a little arrogant, why wouldn't I take the experience bag that's delivered to my doorstep? I promised them. Now, Huaishur was eager to accumulate more experience and skills before he encountered Guashuk. He didn't have to spend too much effort looking for her. So how could he possibly reject her? Previously, his match had overlapped with Motoko's match, or he hadn't watched it for various reasons. Now, he wanted to experience the power of this Russian Federation bear. So what's the bet? Huaishur walked directly to the door and looked at Vladimir's emissary. For a named duel, the person who proposes it usually has to bet a heavy reward, right? It's been verified by the Astronomy Society. It's an anonymous black card from the Hell Magic Gold Bank. The overdraft limit is about $10 million US. It can be handed over to you in advance. What was taken out from the middle-aged man's pocket was a card sealed in crystal. It looked like it was made of black iron, and it looked simple and crude. What was engraved on it was the furnace emblem that the dwarves in the Magic Gold Bank liked the most. It was the equivalent of the currency in the abyss. The funds and limits stored in it could be exchanged for source crystals at any time. Depending on the authority and level, there would even be discounts. If that was the case, it wasn't worth mentioning at all. Wasn't it just money? Who didn't have it? Even Huaishur, who was now penniless because of a black-hearted woman's daily robbery, didn't care about this little bit of money. Who was he fooling? When he was a supervisor, he went out and did more than this amount, but in the magic gold bank, the black card didn't mean VIP. It was synonymous with taboo services. Simply put, what could be overdrawn from it wasn't the amount of money, but the luck that was equivalent to the value of the overdrawn amount after tens of thousands of calculations by the dwarf actuaries. In other words, as long as he held this card, he could enjoy the good luck worth 10 million US dollars at any time. But at the same time, he had to pay a price. Along with the high interest, the back of good luck was bad luck. Overdrawing good luck had to be repaid by encountering bad luck. Once used, the anonymous black card would be automatically bound until the debt was paid off. It would not be restored to its anonymous state until the debt was paid off. In other words, before that, the user would maintain a state where cold water would be stuck in his teeth. Even walking on the road would be hit by things. Sitting at home, there might be cannonballs falling from the sky. It was not a problem for the inexplicable negative reviews to be damaged. Okay, no matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat. It's passable. Hawaii sure had a toothache when he saw this. This thing was completely useless to him. His own luck had been changed by Crow to the point that even his mother couldn't recognize it. Not to mention, there was the interference and influence of the Book of Destiny. If he tried to have a little bit of good luck with this thing, it might cause a messy chain reaction. After thinking about it, he took it and threw it to Zhan Shi. After Huaishir solemnly reminded her to use it with caution, she signed her name on the confirmation form. So what's the time of the match? Tonight. Okay, then it's decided. Huaishir nodded. Suddenly, he felt an uneasy premonition and his heart become stronger. Late at night, Imperial Chef's Test Arena. When Huaishir entered the arena, the entire arena was already illuminated by the blazing fire. The heat was oppressive. It was the grill. The huge grill had already been preheated. The layer of flames burning in it was obviously not ordinary. It could still cause needle-like pain from afar. The scorching heat enveloped the entire arena. He had the upper hand. Vladimir's upper body was naked, and he was only wearing a pair of large underpants. Countless tattoos continuously overlapped on his layers of muscles, and the old and new ones were randomly scattered together. Even his original appearance could not be seen clearly. Miss Huaishir, long time no see. Vladimir laughed and put his hands on his hips. The skull tattoo on his face revealed a layer of joy. I didn't expect to have a chance to compete with you. That's great. I've been looking forward to this day for a long time. Sorry, I don't have the hobby of exchanging cooking skills with wanted criminals. Miss Huaishir glanced at the tattoo of a demon holding a knife on his shoulder and the fine Russian Federation words on it. Cut the throat of the informant. In addition, church, double-headed eagle, human face, poisonous snake, demon, and angel. Layers of tattoos and words that revealed his identity were piled up messily on this overly strong body. It made people wonder if this guy was so strong that he was so strong to have more tattoos. But there was no doubt that every tattoo was the mark of the Russian Federation's mafia. There were even the marks and symbols of various criminal organizations on the border. Don't say that. Everyone has a time when they were young and insensible. Vladimir patted his bald head. I've changed my appearance now. I fight for justice. Miss Huaishir, do you want to know more about our Pacific Rim Rare Animal Protection Association? Sorry, I'm not interested in animal protection organizations. The corner of Huaishir's eyes twitched. Amazing. Wasn't it a little too creative for a mafia member to retire as animal insurance? It's okay. There's nothing to lose by learning about it. The beautiful ocean, the mother of mankind, is calling us. No, I already said that I'm not interested. Huaisher looked at the grill beside him and nodded. Are you planning to barbecue? Yes, that's right. Vladimir didn't hide his boasting. But Aram and I are the best cooking demons here, who are good at roasting ingredients. By the way, although that guy looks like a hippie, he's best at roasting meat in the Ottoman style. It's lukewarm and conservative. It's really not interesting at all. I prefer a more rough fire. Only the meat that can't be burnt and roasted is good meat, right? As he spoke, his fingers tapped on the net on the grill. When the iron wire trembled, it actually made a sharp and thick, high-pitched sound like an electric sound. With a few casual taps of his fingers, the flames seemed to come alive. They rose from the steel-like charcoal and gathered into a blurry figure that wandered on the grill net. The vibrations overlapped with each other and actually vaguely formed a melody. And in the blurry melody, the figure formed by the flames instantly split into two and began to dance enthusiastically on the iron net. It followed Vladimir. Cossack dance. Huaisher raised his eyebrows and slowly frowned. Isn't this already considered sexual harassment? The tune was clearly a folk song from the Russian Federation. Peddler. The young peddler used brocades and jewelry to lure beautiful girls to the wheat fields late at night to make a deal with him. I'm afraid that most people's opportunity to listen to this song came from a certain ancestor-level square game, right? This is a passionate confession, Miss Huaisher. Vladimir laughed loudly. He crossed his arms, and his legs bounced along with the melody on the ground. Do you feel my strong passion? Sorry, no. Goodbye. Huaisher walked over indifferently, raised his palm, bent his fingers, and flicked his fingers on the grill. In an instant, the buzzing sound was cut off. The huge grill trembled violently, and the blurry melody changed from a passionate peddler to a light tune. The nutcracker. After Huaisher's fingers swept over, the passionate Cossack dance on the grill changed. The pure, white flames shrank into a slender figure, circling gracefully. No matter how the illusions and the other flames chased after it, they could not touch the graceful figure dancing gracefully on the grill net. Ha! This is probably a bootlicker. Under the stunned gazes of the audience, Miss Huaisher smiled sympathetically. Competing in fire control? Who am I afraid of? Chapter 672. This is really amazing. The finesse is even above mine. It's not inferior to the highest grade of alchemy furnace, right? Vladimir leaned closer and sighed. As expected, Miss Huaiji is a strong enemy who is beyond my expectations. If that's the case, it doesn't matter even if the plan is changed. It's really satisfying, really satisfying. He chattered endlessly, talking to himself. It was as if he was a person living in his own world. He didn't care whether others could understand him or not, nor did he care what others thought of him. Vladimir reached out and took out a specially made material box from under the table. He placed it on the cooking table and raised his head to ask, I know that Miss Huaiji has the habit of cooking later. So, it's okay for me to prepare the ingredients a little before the competition starts, right? In the material box that was opened a little, wisps of cold white mist kept rising. There was no doubt that it was the extreme cold that was artificially simulated. A whole piece of thick ice, as if it had been dug out from under some layer of ice, was suffused with a faint blue light. One of the thick hind legs was revealed. It had a beautiful cross-section, and the texture of the meat could be clearly seen. But the problem was the meat of the hind leg that occupied the entire inside of the ice was actually half the size of the table. What kind of animal's leg could be so thick? It didn't have any deep sedimentation or the aura of hell. Any culinary demon could tell that it was a creature that was born and raised in the present realm. And the outermost part of the fur, with thick gray hair, looked strangely familiar. He couldn't think of where he had seen it before. Raising his hand axe, Vladimir roughly tore apart the ice on the cooking table. He shoveled away the irrelevant corners and delicately tore apart the flesh of the hind leg that had already been embedded. No, it had already fused with the entire ice block. He reached out and scraped out a trace of scarlet blood powder. He put it into his mouth, tasted it slightly, and nodded in satisfaction. To be honest, what I'm really good at is actually steak, but real steak doesn't need such complicated tools. It only needs a red-hot stone and a piece of meat. I don't even need to care about the type of meat. After all, in prison, having rats to eat is already a happy enough thing. However, for such a precious ingredient, it must be cooked in the most serious way. The corners of Weishur's eyes twitched as he finally guessed something. This is an elephant. Vladimir froze on the spot and looked at the woman in disbelief. He was stunned. Then he said seriously, "Elephants are protected animals. Miss Weishi?" What the hell? 100,000 question marks rose from Weishur's head. What did you say? Today, there are less than 400,000 elephants left in the world. Due to the destruction of vegetation and changes in the environment, the number of elephants is decreasing every year. Even so, there are still poachers who constantly attack these pitiful creatures for their ivory products. It's already hard enough for them to survive, so why eat them? Vladimir said righteously. Every year, the African Rare Animal Protection Association will put in a lot of effort and cost to help this poor species continue to exist. Even if it's someone who has nothing to do with animal protection, you shouldn't think about eating it. The corners of Weishur's mouth twitched violently, and his entire body went numb. The first time he was taught by Chef Demon was about animal protection. Amazing! What kind of King Chef Demon are you? Also, you're really an animal conservationist. It was as if he saw the light of the Holy Mother shining on the earth. This muscular guy with tattoos all over his body was emitting a loving light, which made Weishur a little unbearable. I don't want a male mother. Okay, stop talking. Weishur covered his face and pointed at the hind leg meat on his cooking table. Then what is this? Then, please allow me to introduce to you. I specially prepared and brought it for this Chef Demon duel. It's a rare treasure mined from the deepest part of the ice field in my hometown. It's one of the few wonderful ingredients in the world. Vladimir spread out his hands and announced loudly, "Wait." Weishur raised his hand, took out his phone, opened the translation software, and pointed it at him. "Say it again." On the screen, the translation software quickly came up with a result. It was a Russian word that was used to refer to things that lurked underground in the early days. Nowadays, it was usually used to refer to a species of elephant-like creature that had gone extinct 11,000 years ago. In other words, it was as if there was a loud and clear cry in his mind. In an instant, amidst the illusory wind and snow that pounced on his face, a giant mammoth that was as tall as a mountain walked out. Its huge teeth were pointed at the sky, sharp as knives. When it took a step, the earth shook. The overlord of the ice field walked on its own territory, and a loud rumble sounded. Mammoth Weishur felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and he almost roared, "Isn't this a King rare animal? It doesn't count if it's already dead." Vladimir shrugged and spread his hands. "Besides, I've already used the most solemn etiquette to entertain it. I believe that even if it knows, it will understand and thank me. Yes, the mammoth will thank your 8 generations of ancestors. Why can't rare animals be eaten? But extinct species don't matter. The standards of animal protectors are so king strange. Wait, if it's true, that means..." Weishur lowered his head and looked at the huge piece of meat in front of him. He frowned. In front of him was epic-level zombie meat that had been preserved under the ice for more than 10,000 years. Can this thing really be eaten? However, under Vladimir's treatment, the huge piece of meat slowly returned to its former softness without any signs of decay. Then, under the strong pressure and kneading of his 10 fingers, he forcefully marinated it in the sauce. There was a thick smell that he had never felt before. It was the most simple and traditional meat fragrance. At the same time, it was also a fragment of the past that had been passed down for 11,000 years. It was completely unimaginable that mammoth meat could be eaten under the cooking demon's treatment. It was so well preserved that it could even be eaten. This fantastical scene that assaulted his senses, just thinking about how such a thing would be placed on a barbecue grill, Huaishur could hear the wails of the group of paleontologists. But what did this have to do with the cold and heartless Miss Paper? Just by smelling the fragrance in the air, he was able to understand one thing that could not be doubted. That was really a good piece of meat. The feeling of uneasiness grew stronger and stronger. In the silence, he frowned and looked at the stage. There was no movement behind the curtains. Why hadn't they announced the start of the competition? At the edge of the arena, in the stands, Jeanne, she heard a voice coming from beside her. "Can I sit here?" She was stunned for a moment and looked up in surprise. Only then did she see the figure standing beside her. The words and the tone were familiar, but the person who came was completely different. "Cousin Hoopa." After hesitating for a moment, she slowly nodded. "Please sit." "Thank you." Hoopa smiled reservedly and sat on the chair beside her. "If I remember correctly, this should be our first official meeting, right?" "Yes." Jeanne, she shrunk her neck and nodded uneasily. She did not know why this distant cousin of hers had come to find her. "Actually, this is not the first time. We met before when you were young, but a 2 or 3-year-old child does not remember things. I'm afraid you have already forgotten." She turned around and looked at Junshi. She nodded. "You seem to be doing well." "Yes." Junshi nodded again. She did not know what to say. "Don't worry, I can understand your uneasiness. I just came to take a look." Hoopa laughed softly. "That old bastard's movements are too big. I'm afraid there will be people who will do something desperate. Be careful for the next 2 days. If possible, stick close to Paper. No matter how chaotic it is, nothing will happen to you." Jeanne, she nodded as if she understood. Hoopa nodded and slowly stood up. Just as she was about to leave, she heard an unhappy voice coming from the stands. "What is going on?" The eunuch with black teeth roared angrily. "Is the Rygian clan so negligent now? They actually made the High Emperor's envoy wait for so long? Where is Xiujiang? Have Xiujiang come see me." "No need. Xiujiang will not come today." A familiar and cold voice came from behind the curtains of the higher-ups. He said, "The competition has begun. Everyone—" From now on, in that instant, the earth rumbled. The sound of waves came from afar. Amidst the rumbling, a thick blood-red color appeared in every inch of the air. It turned into a glass-like color that illuminated everything, as if it wanted to cover everything. A sudden change occurred. "Sir Ashikaga, Elder Xiujiang has already agreed to your request. An hour ago, Jiu Jing was kneeling outside the door and respectfully reported, 'Before the chef and demon duel ends, you may visit the 8th room at any time.'" Oh, why did he suddenly change his mind? Behind the paper door, Ashikaga Nakahiro was sitting upright. He tapped the fan in his hand, switching from arrogance to deference. This is not Elder Xiujiang's style. He is an old man after all. He has already fallen behind the times and does not know the heavens. After this one's persuasion, he has already changed. I ask that Sir be magnanimous. Ashikaga Nakahiro narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, Since that is the case, how about you send the 8th room over? This one only needs to appreciate it for a few days, and I will return it to you. Raiken Jiojing frowned, and his voice became serious. The family's treasure cannot be touched lightly. Sir, your words are too disrespectful. Please forgive me for not being able to convey it. Don't be angry. It was a slip of the tongue. Jiojing, please do not take offense to an old man like me. Ashikaga Nakahiro's tone became warm, as if all his previous suspicions had disappeared. He pushed open the paper door and apologized without any arrogance. This old man was rude before. This kind of excessive request, I will not mention it again. No, this one was too agitated. Please forgive me. Raiken Jiojing bowed and sat down to apologize. You and I do not need to be so distant. Please get up. Ashikaga Nakahiro smiled and helped him up. He suddenly said, Since this is the case, this old man is already impatient. Can you let me feast my eyes now? His intentions were as clear as day. Chapter 673. But after getting permission, he skipped the complicated process that should have been there and couldn't wait to admire the treasures of the Rikimi clan. This could be said to be extremely rude. It wouldn't be strange if Rikimi Jiosher flew into a rage. But in reality, the young man was only stunned for a moment and then nodded. Then, please follow me. Very good, very good. Ashikaga clapped his hands and laughed, and followed behind Rikimi Jiosher. He asked casually, There seems to be a faint smell of blood. Is Mr. Jiosher injured? A little earlier last night, I participated in the arrest of the wrong murderer and suffered some minor injuries. Thank you for your concern. It's good to be young, daring to fight. Someone as old as me can't compare to you. He patted Jiosher's shoulder approvingly. Keep up the good work, Jiosher Kujin-kun. Yes. Jiosher nodded respectfully. In a harmonious atmosphere, the two of them talked and laughed, and walked step by step into the heavily guarded treasury. After passing through layers of treasures, they finally saw a bright light in the innermost secret room. As if it was made of glass, the dazzling armor stood in front of them, shining with a solemn brilliance. Countless sharp facets reflected the illusions of the mortal world. Then, everything returned to nothingness. It was rumored that the Hound God was created by the 8 virtues, and at the same time, it was also a sacred relic in the Ingzhou genealogy, Fushiro glass armor. It seemed as fragile as a dream, but in reality, it had the terrifying defensive power of the Vajra realm membrane, the relic of the head of the Yakshas, and only the head of the clan could inherit the treasure, and every generation could create the miraculous mark of the 8 ascendants. It's so beautiful. The moment he saw the dazzling light, the last trace of doubt in his heart disappeared. What was in front of him was a genuine treasure. It was enough to protect the Rikimi clan for thousands of generations. It was almost within reach in the silence. He couldn't help but take a deep breath and forced himself to calm down and waved behind him. The subordinates in the dark put down their weapons, but they were still ready for battle. Jiojing Jun, you can tell me the truth now. He turned around, his expression cold as he asked, What happened to Quan Jiang? No matter how proud and complacent I am, I don't think that guy will let me get close to the family's treasure. If you go too far, even this old man won't be able to protect you. Lord Quan Jiang's old wounds relapsed, and he unfortunately passed away just now. Ashikaga Nakagawa was stunned for a moment, but before he could praise Jiojing, he heard his calm voice. It's your turn next, Ashikaga-sama. At that moment, it was right behind him. The 8th branch trembled. The silent Fars Luo raised his face. Behind the eyes of the helmet, a ruthless and sinister bloody light suddenly surged from within the solemn and sacred glazed light. In the blink of an eye, the noble divine general had degenerated into a demon. He raised his palm. It easily pierced through the layers of defense and landed on Ashikaga Nakagawa's neck, lifting him up from where he stood as if he was picking up a toy. The 5 fingers that were as sharp as knives slowly tightened. The divine mark that was clearly ownerless was moving on its own at this moment. It regarded him as an enemy, but under Ashikaga Nakagawa's feet, his shadow suddenly shrank to the size of a pinhole. Then it rapidly expanded like a whirlpool, and the legion residing in the shadows responded to the summons. Fars Luo just slowly raised his other hand, pulled out the sword at his waist, and stabbed into his shadow. Endless bloody light spewed out, instantly covering all the darkness and filling it up. Then the terrifying venom dissolved everything in an instant. All that was left was the sizzling sound of the body turning into ashes. Suffocation came suddenly. Ashikaga Nakagawa's eyes widened in shock. His face was ashen, and he struggled with all his might, letting out a hoarse voice. "Are you crazy, you murderous demon?" as expected of Lord Ashikaga. "It's not surprising that you know this." Jiu Jing stared at the furious face, and suddenly sneered. "If I'm not wrong, you trust me so much because you have this information, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't help me deliberately hide the traces of the murderous demon. After a person like me becomes the head of the family, can't I only follow the lead of the Ashikaga clan?" "But it doesn't matter," he said. "I don't care." You. Ashikaga Nakagawa's eyes widened, and his pupils gradually became bloodshot. "Unfortunately, Lord Nakagawa, I don't have much time to play games with you. We could have gotten along harmoniously, but unfortunately, Hoopa is really too powerful, forcing me to act hastily." He said, "Your daughter is a powerful character." The last sentence was naturally not said to Ashikaga Nakagawa, but there was no one else here. Only a hoarse voice sounded from the hollow armor. Squeak, accompanied by the sharp sound. The bright brilliance above Yatsufusa gradually faded. In the end, what remained were countless mottled traces left by overlapping blood. A miracle was reversing into a disaster. The original stigmata relic Yatsufusa was based on the Hound God. After integrating the elements of the 8 virtues, it became the incarnation of the legendary immortal Buddha on earth. But now, the immortal Buddha had fallen and turned into evil spirits. In the history of the past, the princess of the Riken clan, Fuji, was cursed by the vengeful spirit Yuzi. She was implanted with the 8 evils and degenerated into an evil spirit. In order to not let herself become the source of disaster in the world, Princess Fuji sacrificed herself and reversed the 8 evils into the 8 virtues. From then on, 8 loyal and powerful warriors were born in the world. They received the miracle and gift of Yatsufusa and assisted the Riken clan to defeat evil, eradicate the root of disaster, and set things right. This heroic deed was spread by people. After being integrated through the generations, it became the legend of the 8 dogs in the south that was seen today. But in fact, the battle between Princess Fuji and the vengeful spirit Yuzi, and even the war that followed, was just a competition that was carried out around Yatsufusa. Whether it was the 8 virtues or the 8 evils, they were the power of Yatsufusa. The only difference was how they appeared in the world. Now, when the reversal came, the 8 virtues naturally fell apart. Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, faith, loyalty, filial piety, and friendship disappeared without a trace. What replaced them was the malice that had been hidden behind for a long time. Evil, lust, theft, stupidity, evil, madness, chaos, resentment, Amidst the violent tremors, a torrential blood-red light gushed out from under Yatsufus's armor. The ownerless miracle engraving was driven by the ocean-like resentment and pain, and instantly fell into darkness. Then, an endless blood-red light soared into the sky and swallowed the entire mountain range. It was isolated from the outside. The miracle engraving was unfolded, but it was no longer the tranquil and peaceful appearance of the original Jean Gang world. The majestic and solemn wind disappeared without a trace, and was replaced by a complex palace that suddenly rose up high. What the ears heard was the ubiquitous sweet moans and violent roars. What the eyes saw was a colorful and confusing spectacle. What the tongue tasted was a fragrant and sweet fragrance. What the senses felt was a fairyland that was so beautiful that it made one's heart tremble in fear. Inverted dreams. All living beings fell into eternal oblivion. This was heavenly demon Love Dai, Dharmakaya, under the call of this huge disaster. The gorgeous palace of the heavenly demon in the past descended here, guiding all living beings to step onto the path of demons. The 8 great virtues merged into the blood-red light, turning into the gift of the abyss, and descended on all souls equally. Pulling them down, they fell into hell. In Yatsufus's hand, Ashikaga Nakagawa twitched violently, his eyes were bloodshot, and was quickly being eroded by the 8 great evils. It was difficult for him to maintain his sanity. "You lunatic," he hoarsely uttered his last words. There was a small cracking sound in his mouth. It was the poison that he used the last of his strength to bite off. Now the poison flowed and spread, instantly eroding his body and soul, ending everything from the inside out. Not degenerating into an ugly demon, Ashikaga Nakagawa retained his last bit of dignity and killed himself. Even Rikichi Jyo did not expect such an ending. This old man actually had such courage in his bones, but this was not something to be concerned about. It's just the prelude to the opening. Jyo retracted his gaze from the corpse, turned, and walked towards the arena, announcing the opening of the final round. At this moment, when the blood-red light covered everything like turbid glass, heaven and earth changed. All living beings fell into his demonic realm, and the overflowing evil virtues also seeped into every body with the blood of Rikichi. This was the selfless sharing and gift from the murderous demon. Pulling this bloodline that had long since decayed, it headed towards hell. It was as if a mountain fire had spread in an instant. Billowing thick smoke rose into the sky, covering the entire mountain range, shrouding everything in disaster. Above the sky, above the clouds, there were ministers with the wings of Tengu on their backs looking down, watching the fire from the other side of the river. There was no emotion or pity, only coldness. "The way you set yourself on fire is really ugly, Ashikaga Nakagawa." He lowered his eyes, peeking at Ashikaga Nakagawa's tragic death. "For power, you did so many useless things, coveting the power and foundation of the Rikichi clan. In the end, you nurtured a tiger and died from the evil consequences of your own actions. Why bother? You thought you were smart, you sought your own death, and you left a mess for the emperor. Those old bastards of Looming Hall were getting more and more outrageous. He didn't even have a good impression of these old bastards who had long been corrupted by power and the so-called family, let alone saving them. The observer from seat loyally carried out his mission. As the emperor's eyes, he recorded everything that happened here and brought it back to the emperor. The rest had nothing to do with him. So-called Hattori, on a distant mountain ridge, an old samurai with disheveled white hair leaned against a withered tree. He laughed strangely at Tengu. "You don't even have the slightest bit of camaraderie between comrades. Shouldn't the one who should be flustered and exasperated be Kamigawa?" "You old bastard," Hattori replied indifferently, "let's not talk about our losses for now. After all, the general's investment was secretly led by the American genealogy. but it looks like it was all for naught. So what? The old samurai Kamigawa raised his eyes and asked with a puzzled expression. So what? Hattori frowned. After the general hears about it, he might be so angry that he smashes his wine cup, flips the table, and gets angry, but there's nothing we can do about it, right? The old samurai Kamigawa calmly said disrespectful words. Sir Gongfang's temper is not very good, but this kind of thing, there's no need to be so angry, right? If you ask me, if you're really angry, then that's it, the loyal lackey of the general said. Although it will be a headache as a subordinate, it will at most be to the extent of, where can I find a few sensible women to accompany my lord to drink some wine to calm down? Why should I be troubled to the extent of being in a terrible fix? His smile was full of mockery as he glanced at Tengu above the clouds. Don't take it for granted that we're the same as you, okay? He raised his head, opening his mouth to drink the ape wine in the gourd, saying in an unconcerned manner, for example, if you came to a casino by chance, saw a gambling table by chance, and a seat by chance waiting for you, what would you do? It's just a $10 chip. Do you need to calculate for so long just to test your luck? Even if you're unlucky and lose, do you have to beat your chest and stamp your feet in anger? Thus, Kamigawa explained to the enemies who were already like fire and water, the general knows what you're doing, and he knows what you're thinking. Kamigawa laughed strangely and told him, but the general doesn't care. Tengu Hattori was expressionless above the clouds. He did not speak, but looked at the old samurai indifferently. He snorted, since it's just a $10 chip, why would one of the general's 5 great samurai, the unparalleled sword, Kamigawa, personally come? It's just on the way, don't think too much. Kamigawa waved his hand casually. Who asked the master to give the order? I haven't visited for so many years as a disciple, I feel a little guilty. Since there's a chance to repay, I won't refuse. Your success or failure, the life or death of this place, has nothing to do with me. What I hate the most is killing people who are not interesting. So, don't worry. Even if the sky falls and the earth shatters, I won't draw my sword on you. Just like that, he was cold, mocking, indifferent, or rather, helpless. He stared at the domain engulfed by the bloodlight in the demonic realm of his incarnation. He did not come here because of the general's orders, but because of the master's instructions and request. He came here specially. He was here to witness the end of a foolish junior in the dojo back. Then, the people of Dongxia say that 3 years old can tell how old you are, but what can you do if you've been a red deer since young? He sighed helplessly. From 8 years old to 38 years old, Sasaki, you're hopeless. Chapter 674. Huaishur felt an indescribable trend. It was as if a crack had suddenly appeared in the sky, and a torrential torrent gushed out from it, wanting to swallow everything and completely dissolve it. In the blink of an eye, the world in front of him changed from the original arena to the dazzling, glazed palace garden. The bloody light fell from the sky, almost swallowing him. The terrifying pollution was too great. Just by looking at it, he could feel a wave of impatience and dryness in his mouth. Subconsciously, Huaishur pulled out resentment. Countless crow feathers multiplied in his hand, and the bloody light seemed to be pulled by an invisible gravitational force, forming a vortex that wrapped around the blade and continuously entered the cage of dreams. It was like rain from the sky. The crows were screaming excitedly. Bathed in the bloody light, they shook their steel wings and jumped around, opening their mouths to welcome the bloody rain falling from the sky. Time for sponsored partnerships. Feeling the worship and joy from the crows, Huaishur scratched his head, but he didn't feel proud. Instead, his expression turned gloomy due to the change in reality. What the hell was this? The entire house seemed to be enveloped in a giant secret ritual, and there was a faint divine aura in it. Was it a divine mark that originated from the history of the gods? Although it was a little messy, it didn't hurt its nobility and vastness. Just a simple disturbance caused the scene to distort, forming folds like miracles or calamities. Everyone seemed to have disappeared in an instant, and only the cries and screams in the distance could be heard. Only his opponent remained in front of him, and his grill. After the raging flames, Vladimir slowly finished the final marinating process and prepared for the barbecue. His expression didn't change at all. He didn't care about the changes in his surroundings. No, it would be better to say that he had expected it. Recalling the strange mutterings of the other party, Weisher raised his eyebrows in realization. So, is that what you mean by the change of plan? I can't tell you directly. I'm really sorry. After all, it has to be kept a secret. Vladimir shrugged slightly. However, although it was a change in plan, I didn't expect the situation to be so dangerous. So I felt really bad and gave you an extra 30 million for your labor, right? In my opinion, the boss is the kind of person who looks cold-blooded and heartless on the surface, but in reality, he is easily apologetic. Now that you mention it, you sound like someone from Ingzhou. Ha ha ha. You don't have any objections to being left here as a hired thug. Weisher sighed in amazement. You're really an excellent tool, Vladimir. Actually, I don't mind if you call me Walia. That's my Christian name. As for other things, I don't really care. Vladimir said calmly, if you're paid, you have to work. Since you're paid by your employer, whether it's smuggling or committing murder and arson, you should do your job dutifully. As long as the reward is worth it, I don't really care what the mission is about. Therefore, Miss Huai-Shi, the burly chef with a naked upper body, raised his eyes and stared at the opponent in front of him. He issued a challenge. If it's possible, can you be my enemy and fight me here? Sorry, if you don't have the 520 red packet, I'm going to take a shower. Hee, let's talk next time. 8. Weisher picked up the blade of hatred, turned around, and walked straight to the door in the distance. He didn't pay any attention to Vladimir's invitation and challenge. He had a more important mission to complete. Even with the protection of the crow in the shadow, Makoto still had no resistance to this demon-like world. However, there was no time for him to waste. It's okay, I've already expected it. When he passed by the grill, he heard Vladimir's voice. So, I'll use a super fast way to make it. He twisted his wrist and stepped on the valve. In an instant, a pungent smell came from the mesmerizing fragrance in the wind. It was burning hot. Just by taking a breath, he almost choked and couldn't breathe. It was the oil pump that had been turned on. It was adding fuel to the fire. But even if it was adding fuel to the fire, how could it be so violent? The strange fire that used iron as carbon suddenly rose and boiled out of the small furnace. It turned into a tornado, swirling and expanding, and instantly spread out. The bright silver color, which resembled molten iron, instantly engulfed the entire city of Vladimir. However, the tall and sturdy silhouette still highlighted its existence in the violent flames. Bathing in the crazy high temperature in the air, Vladimir was laughing wildly, and from the dancing flames and billowing smoke, Weisher actually felt the existence of a huge amount of metal particles: cobalt, lithium, beryllium, magnesium, aluminum, boron. Even as an alchemist, he could easily distinguish the existence of other chemical substances: ethylene, methane, and a huge amount of kerosene. Countless substances were integrated in one place. It was just a small bucket, but it could erupt with such overwhelming firepower. Even his freedom incarnation's devil realm was almost burned through by the flames. If this was used as a weapon, it could probably unleash a more terrifying destructive power than what was in front of him. Ha 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 ha, you're scared. Engulfed by the fire and the furnace-like high temperature, Vladimir laughed proudly, without the slightest damage. His skillful demonic culinary skills were controlling this huge firepower, as if he was driving a derailed train through the downtown area, constantly brushing past the tragic end of turning into ashes. This is a good thing that the boss specially helped me get from the launch base in Siberia. This lunatic. Isn't it amazing? Weisher finally realized the origin of this terrifying firepower. It was the fuel for space rockets. It was enough to push a behemoth of thousands of tons out of the gravitational pull of the Earth and let man-made things stand above the sky. From a certain point of view, this could be said to be the precious crystallization of human history, right? The burning brilliance that sprouted from wisdom. It evolved all the way from the sparse fire of the cavemen in the ancient caves, starting from when the man named Prometheus lifted the tree branch and plucked the first wisp of fire from the wheel of Helios. From the temple, from the stove, from the battlefield, from the laboratory, from the lava of the underground cave, it continued to transform, extinguish, and revive. It became more exuberant, bigger, and more glorious. In the end, it burned the sky, propelling the miracle of man, breaking away from the shackles of the world, making the steel palace stand shoulder to shoulder with the gods. And above the sky, this arrogance, pride, and thirst were the embodiment of man's endless desire to explore. And now, the records of the overlords of ancient times and the glory of modern times were merged into one in the burning. The history of the past was on the grill, roasted and burned by the fire of human glory. A brilliant and solemn aura slowly rose from it. It carried a sacred and tempting aura. Just by existing there, it was like a precious miracle crystal, coveted. In a short moment, the work from Vladimir was completed. You can eat the fruit of any tree in the garden at will, but you can't eat the fruit of the tree of good and evil. Just as the fire slowly dissipated, the burly cooking demon, whose body was charred black, stepped forward. Without any hesitation, he pierced the browned and crispy steak on the grill with a huge fork and raised it without any reverence for a miracle. He looked at his opponent and customer and smiled happily. Come, madam, it's time to fall. It's no longer a showdown between cooking demons. Vladimir, Weisher asked indifferently, do you think I'll eat it? Surely not, right? But it doesn't matter. Vladimir, whose face was covered in scorch marks, shook his head. In that instant, his originally ordinary face suddenly swelled up, and the crack at the corner of his mouth actually extended to the back of his neck. His sharp teeth were exposed layer upon layer, like a shark's. He said, "This is for me." In that instant, the stigmata ogre was activated. The miracle of calamity, which devoured life to survive, operated in the huge and robust body. As the sharp teeth closed together, the perfect result was swallowed into the stomach along with the roasting fork. In the Slavic legends, the monsters that wandered in the mountains and caves where few people went, the giant monsters that devoured life and gained intelligence, in an instant had transformed into monsters that ate humans as food. Now, Vladimir was unbridled in his gluttony, swallowing the power that combined the fire of human wisdom and the ruler of the ice wasteland into his stomach. Without any scruples, the huge power exploded in his lungs. Human wisdom and barbaric power emerged with a loud bang. The ogre was devouring history, and the moment he opened his mouth, indescribable horror and uneasiness emerged from Weischer's heart. Without thinking, he launched an attack. The blade of hatred roared mournfully. In an instant, it disappeared. His head should have been chopped off, but not the slightest bit of blood, energy, or origin substance was plundered. What spurted out from the wound on his neck was not blood and scarlet, but endless bleakness and bone-piercing frost. A storm swept across. After the mammoth that had slept on the ancient ice field for tens of thousands of years was ignited by the fire of human wisdom, the crystallization formed catalyzed the transformation of the ogre, filling that body with majestic power. What sprouted from it was actually a wisp of incomparably precious divinity. The traces of God reappeared here. In the endless extreme cold storm, a hoarse roar came. It was Vladimir's painful scream, as well as a carefree roar and vent. His body, which was originally shockingly burly, expanded once again, reaching a height of nearly 3 meters. Layers of sharp icicles extended out from his shattered flesh. All the flames were extinguished. What replaced it was a terrifying cold that froze the soul. In the roar of the earth, the mammoth's roar gradually turned into a hoarse whisper, shaking the entire demonic realm of his incarnation, causing that low voice to resound in everyone's ears. I am ice and snow. I am the master of freezing and desolation. Vladimir's eyes shot out an ice-cold divine light. He opened his mouth and spat out an extremely cold holy light. When his lips opened and closed, when he spoke, it overlapped with another old and low voice. Through the combination of human wisdom and desolation, and by cheating, the Tier 3 ogre temporarily reached this realm. Now he was no longer a ferocious demon, but an immortal existence in Slavic mythology, the Lord of Ice and Snow, who had inherited God's blood and history. I am the King of Winter. In the gradually extinguishing snowstorm, a burly and solemn figure stepped out, looking down from above and declaring to the enemy, I am the Father of Frost. In the dead silence, Huaishur was silent. He could not help but feel a headache and sighed helplessly. Well, did we discuss not being allowed to transform before? Chapter 675. He didn't eat a pig's head, nor did he eat an elephant's leg. It was one thing to be tricked into such a damned place, but he was also forced to watch someone else transform. Huaishur felt that he had been hurt. If it was an ordinary person, Huaishur would have beaten his dog brain out long ago. However, after carefully looking at the solemn and cold Shuang's father in front of him, Huaishur decided to talk to him calmly. I said, can't you really let me go? Sorry, I can't. Vladimir shook his head, and the old voice overlapped with his. If you surrender without a fight, we can talk about cooking, as long as you don't try to leave. Looks like there's no room for discussion. Huaishur sighed. There's nothing I can do. After all, I took the money. Vladimir sighed and raised his hand. In his hand, a dazzling golden light appeared and turned into a handle. Then, a slender and sharp saber extended from the handle. Wait! Huaishur suddenly raised his hand and gritted his teeth. How much did your employer give you? I'll give you double. Vladimir was stunned for a moment, and then he was ecstatic. Really? That's great. If possible, I don't want to kill Miss Huaiji. He beamed and counted with his fingers. 130 million US dollars. Double is 260 million US dollars. In that case, I can refund an additional 30 million US dollars to the boss as liquidated damages. Huaishur's smile gradually stiffened. Soon, he lowered his eyes helplessly. 260 million US dollars. Even if Huaishur squeezed together, it would be difficult for her to come up with 20 million. Moreover, the money from Hupo's stinky sister hadn't arrived yet. Where did he get so much money to hire this guy to work? With this money, wouldn't it be nice to buy a fighter jet? Forget it. He interrupted Vladimir's words and then raised the blade of resentment. You'd better kill me, or I'll kill you. In an instant, a fierce flame that wasn't inferior to the color of frost rose from Huaiji Susie's body. The instant the hand of confinement was activated, flames burst out from the forging furnace, continuously pulling the drifting bloody light in the air like an engine that was rumbling loudly. Young Master Ming's divinity emerged from the darkness of the bone-burying sanctuary. In that instant, against the backdrop of darkness and ferocious flames. Miss Huaiji's lips curled into a mocking smile. It was shameful to say, but in this place he was the host. In the huge glazed palace, countless bloody colors surged between the walls. Within this demonic realm, everything was constantly emitting an irresistible amount of negative origin substance, corroding everything in its path. The moment Hoopa reacted, he instinctively grabbed something beside him. He grabbed nothing but air. Shin, who had been so close to him, had disappeared. However, he had no idea where she had been thrown to. Masahira and Shinichi Masahira were having a showdown between the chef and demon when everyone was unprepared and unprepared. If he were to think about it in a bad way, perhaps his elder brother, who had been studying abroad for many years, was already standing on Jiujing's side. In the silence, a clear and crisp voice suddenly rang out. The sound of a phone, ringing, right in the middle of the palace. A dark green old-fashioned phone booth suddenly appeared. In the narrow space inside, a hanging phone was constantly ringing. It was hard to tell whether it was a sharp or clear ringing. It kept ringing. It was filled with patience, until Hoopa pushed open the door, reached out, took the phone, and put it to his ear. "Who is it?" Hoopa asked coldly. "Let me guess, is it my elder brother, Mr. Masahira?" "Long time no see, Hoopa." The low and hoarse male voice on the other end of the phone replied. "It's me." "Then can you tell me, what did you do?" Hoopa asked coldly. "Be merciful, and tell me, what role did my elder brother play in the destruction of the Shinichi family?" "Me? I didn't do anything." On the other end of the phone, the middle-aged man who was wiping his hands in front of the sink raised his head and looked at himself in the mirror. He told her seriously, "I just chose not to play any role." "So, you want to tell me that you're innocent?" Hoopa sneered. "You've been like this since you were young, Brother Masahira. You've always played by yourself, never taking the initiative to speak, always pushing the boat with the current, never showing your face. What, do you plan to not show your face when you become the head of the family in the future?" "I don't plan to do that." Shinichi Masahira shook his head. "As a member of the Shinichi family, I got involved, but this doesn't mean that I have any interest in the position of head." He said, "The reason I came back is to put an end to this. No matter how dazzling the Shinichi family's existence is, to me, nothing more than a restraint. From this point of view, I'm on Jiujing's side. I sincerely hope that this cage that exists only in name can be completely destroyed." In the silence, Shinichi Masahira sighed, softly. "Hoopa, I originally thought that you would be the same as me, that your talent is even above mine. Unfortunately, the shadow that uncle left on you is far greater than I imagined. If the Shinichi family didn't exist, you might be able to achieve even greater things. At least, you'd be far more free than you are now. There's nothing in this world that's closer to a lie than freedom. Brother, you should save it." Hoopa sneered in response. "If that's what you plan to do, what happens next will have nothing to do with the Shinichi family. Although it's a bit heartless, I hope so. After leaving the family, my life has been smooth and stable. Hoopa, not every fish wants to live in the ocean of other people's imaginations." Shinichi Masahira regretfully said goodbye. "From today onwards, the Shinichi family has nothing to do with me. I'm Sergei Satomi. That's all. If there's any other purpose besides this, it's that I hope you can also obtain your freedom." Before hanging up, he said sincerely, "Even if you don't care about this, this is the last bit of blessings from your former elder brother." He said, "Goodbye, Hoopa." "No, it's goodbye forever." Hoopa coldly corrected him. "You can run away like this, coward. Congratulations, you're free." The communication was cut off. The middle-aged man in front of the mirror turned off the faucet and straightened his tie. He turned around and walked out of the bathroom, heading towards the conference room. The secretary looked up and was slightly surprised when he saw how calm he was. "What's wrong?" he asked, puzzled. "I can't put my finger on it, but it feels different." The secretary asked curiously, "Did something good happen, Mr. Sergey?" "Yes, it feels like I've been reborn." The man named Sergey chuckled softly and looked up at the official from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. "Speaking of which, I have a new proposal for the import of crude oil from Ingzhou in the second half of the year." The conference continued, but it had nothing to do with Shinichi Masahira. This was a story that belonged to Sergey. After hanging up, the glazed palace returned to a deathly silence. Apart from the cries of pain and moans of bliss in the distance, there was no other sound. The phone booth slowly turned into a phantom and disappeared. When the interference from Shinichi Masahira disappeared, the all-pervasive bloody light filled the air and headed towards Hupa. The surging eight evils slowly penetrated his bones. Then it crashed into an invisible barrier and disappeared without a trace. Only the ancient mirror in his arms gave off a faint sense of warmth. Hupa didn't need to take it out to know that it was a bronze mirror that was made from an ancient fragment and was glowing faintly. It was constantly extracting the evil thoughts that invaded her soul and maintaining her consciousness. This was the parting gift that Mystic Bird had given her. There was an ancient mirror in a Pang palace, the gallbladder, which could reflect diseases of the five viscera. If a woman had evil thoughts, she could be seen in the mirror, and the Qin Emperor would kill her. The mirror was a mirror that constantly reflected her consciousness, allowing her to maintain the most basic level of calmness and tranquility. Otherwise, she would have long since fallen into madness. However, to give her such a gift before parting, that old man Mystic Bird was unexpectedly wicked. On the afternoon of the day she walked into Mystic Bird's office, the old man, who was in a hurry to go home and watch television with his great-grandson, gave her two options. There's a saying that if a foreigner enters Dongxia, then Dongxia will. To be honest, the Social Security Bureau doesn't care about your past identity. You can stay. This isn't a job that was specially assigned to you. However, no matter where you are, if you want to have a place that you can call home, you should first feel peace. Therefore, Hupa, wherever you can find your peace, you should go. The old man, who was eating melon seeds under the setting sun, calmly told her, "I won't force your decision." The next day, after receiving Hupo's reply, he wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he gave this thing to her. The sacred mark of Prajna is the crystallization of the evil path. It nibbles away at resentment. If you can't control your resentment, then it will devour you. You have hatred in your heart, even if you don't actively hate anything. Hupa, if you can't let go of this obsession, you will never be free from the haze of the past. So, Shinichi Amber, are you really ready? Hate. She lowered her head and stared at the ferocious face of herself in the bronze mirror. Countless wisps of black smoke rose up and interweaved on her face to form a ferocious illusion of Prajna. She couldn't see the young girl's beautiful face anymore. Perhaps that was the real her. She had long been devoured by Prajna's hatred. After so many years, she hadn't made any progress. Perhaps she had long fallen into the demonic path. She was lost in the huge vortex of hatred, but she couldn't freely vent it. She couldn't truly become a demon. She couldn't obtain the freedom to hate, and she didn't have the qualifications to not hate. How laughable, Hupa! She laughed self-deprecatingly. She listened to the deep footsteps in the distance. It had been so long, but it was so familiar, until the door opened with a bang. A majestic glazed armor appeared from his demonic realm. behind the ferocious mask, there was only a wisp of bloody fire burning fiercely, the remnant soul of the past that was immersed in the evil thoughts roared in pain. Chi-Chi. This was the reunion of the father and daughter after 8 years. But before she drew her sword, what should she say? In silence, the young girl's eyes drooped. Chi-Chi, Chi-Chi. Ai Fuchi. I'm back, father. I haven't seen you for so long. How have you been? What responded to her was a roar, and roar filled with chaos. There were no more words left, and there was no intention to talk. There was no warm greeting of welcome back, only bone-piercing killing intent. The ferocious armor drew its sword. The Vajra sword that was burning with blood was raised and aimed at her face. Slash. Chi-Chi, Chi-Chi, Chi. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most